The water moved first, slowly, without violence, without warning. Far beneath the domed cities of Mon Cala, where light thinned into pale blue sheets and disappeared into depth, something shifted. Not enough to be seen, but enough to be felt. The cities above rested like living reefs, curved structures grown from coral and craft, soft lights glowing through the pressure of the sea. Everything here seemed alive. Stone held memory, metal carried vibration. Even silence had weight. For the young Mon Calamari, who would one day be called Ackbar, sleep rarely came without sound. The ocean never allowed it. Currents pressed gently against the outer walls. Distant creatures called through layers of water. A low, constant hum ran through the city, machines woven into the rhythm of the sea. He listened, not out of discipline, not because anyone asked him to. It was simply there, impossible to ignore. Other children moved differently. They raced through open water, weaving between pillars, chasing speed for the sake of it. Ackbar did not. He slowed, paused where others passed, watched where others glanced. There were things in the water that did not reveal themselves to movement alone. Patterns, quiet and consistent. He began to notice them early. A school of fish shifting direction moments before danger appeared. Currents bending around broken structures as if guided by memory. Massive creatures navigating the deep without hesitation, choosing paths that never failed them. Nothing moved without reason. That truth settled into him before he had words for it. The sea did not explain. It repeated, again and again, until understanding formed on its own. At times, he would leave the crowded chambers behind and move toward the observation levels, vast transparent walls opening into endless water. There, he preferred to stand alone, still, hands drawn behind his back in quiet habit. Too young for such stillness, some would say. But stillness did not feel empty to him. It felt full, as if something was always speaking, just beyond what most chose to hear. Outside, the ocean stretched without boundary. Silt drifted slowly over ancient stone. Small creatures moved through coral that had grown over ruins older than memory. Farther out, where light weakened into shadow, larger forms passed without fear. Ackbar watched, measured distance without realizing it, noticed spacing, timing, reaction. When one form shifted, another adjusted. When pressure changed, movement followed. There was no panic in it, only response, only adaptation. That stayed with him. On Mon Cala, history was not confined to words. It lived in structures, in submerged ruins, in ceremonial halls built to remember what could not be forgotten. It also lived in tension. The presence of the Quarren was always near. Shared oceans, shared boundaries, not always shared trust. Even as a child, he understood something unspoken. Peace was not the absence of conflict. It was something maintained, like a structure holding under pressure, strong but never without strain. Sometimes he heard voices he was not meant to hear, muted conversations beyond doorways, council tones, careful words chosen to avoid sharper truths, resources, territory, representation. Old disagreements stirred, then settled again, like disturbed sand returning to the seabed. No war followed those moments. Not yet. But he remembered the feeling of them, the way calm voices could carry weight beneath them, the way silence afterward often meant more than what had been said. He carried these observations without effort, the patterns in water, the tension in stillness, the meaning behind movement. One evening, as the dim light above faded and the deeper ocean turned into a vast field of shadow, Ackbar stood once more at the observation wall. A shape emerged in the distance, large, ancient. Its body moved with slow certainty, scarred but unchallenged. Nothing in its path resisted, nothing needed to. It did not rush, it did not hesitate, it simply moved, with control, with purpose. Ackbar followed its path for as long as he could. Then it vanished into darkness, gone without disturbance. For a moment, only his reflection remained in the glass. Young, unproven, quiet, but already listening for things others had learned to ignore. Outside, the current shifted again, softly. Almost nothing. Yet something in the vast dark beyond had changed. He felt it immediately. Not as fear, not as understanding, just awareness. The ocean was not only teaching him how to live, it was showing him something else. How to recognize the moment just before everything changes. The feeling did not leave him. It stayed beneath everything else. Quiet, unresolved. Like a current moving far below the surface where light could not reach. The days that followed did not change. Not on the outside. Lessons continued. Voices filled the halls. The city moved as it always had, steady, controlled, unaware. But Ackbar noticed small shifts, not in events, in behavior, a delay in response where there had once been certainty, a slight tightening in movement among the patrol swimmers. Even the migration patterns outside the observation levels felt less predictable, not broken, just altered. He could not explain it. So he watched more carefully, spent longer in the outer corridors where the water pressed closest against the city walls. There, the sounds were clearer, less filtered. The ocean spoke more directly. One cycle, he followed a group of maintenance workers moving toward a lower structure. Old sections, less visited, the kind of places where history remained, layered beneath repairs. No one stopped him. He moved quietly, observed. The deeper levels felt different, colder, not in temperature, in presence. The walls carried marks of older construction, less refined, more functional, built in a time when survival mattered more than design. Through a wide viewing panel, the open sea stretched into shadow, and there, movement, not large, not immediate, something distant but deliberate, a cluster of shapes, holding formation longer than natural movement allowed. He leaned closer, watched. The shapes did not scatter like creatures. They adjusted, maintained distance from one another, shifted direction in unison, too controlled, too precise. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, in focus. He had seen patterns all his life. This one did not belong to the ocean. Behind him, a voice broke the silence. Low, sharp. A command not meant for him. He turned only slightly, enough to listen. Two figures stood at the far end of the corridor, uniformed, their tones restrained but urgent beneath the surface. Not yet confirmed. Keep it contained. The council will decide when. The rest faded into the hum of the structure. Ackbar did not move closer. He did not need to. The tone carried more than the words. Something was being held back, not hidden completely, just delayed. He turned his attention back to the glass. The shapes were gone. No disruption, no trace, only empty water stretching outward. But the absence felt louder than the movement had. He remained there longer than usual, watching nothing, waiting without knowing why. Eventually, the corridor emptied. The distant voices faded. The hum returned to its usual rhythm. Everything appeared unchanged. But the stillness felt different now. Not calm, measured. as if something beyond the city had begun to move with intention. And the ocean, for the first time, did not feel like it was guiding him. It felt like it was withholding something. The absence should have settled. It did not. Something had been there. He was certain of it. Not instinct, not imagination. Pattern. And patterns did not disappear without cause. Ackbar returned the next cycle, earlier this time, before the corridors filled, before the distant hum of activity layered over the quieter sounds of the sea. The lower levels were still. Only the structure itself seemed awake, soft vibrations through the walls, faint pulses moving through the supports. He reached the observation panel, waited. At first, nothing, only drifting silt, distant shadows too large to define, the usual rhythm, slow, unbroken, then a flicker, far out, brief, gone before it could be followed. His posture shifted slightly, not tension, adjustment. He stayed still, eyes fixed on the same point. Time passed, long enough that most would have turned away. He did not. Another flicker, closer now. This time it held longer. Shapes, multiple, again moving in formation, not natural, not random. The spacing remained exact. Their direction changed, but their order did not break. Something guided them, or someone. A faint vibration passed through the glass, so slight it could have been dismissed, but it repeated. A pulse, then another, not from the city, from beyond it. Ackbar placed his hand lightly against the surface, felt it, measured it without thinking. Regular, deliberate, a signal. The realization came without urgency, just clarity. This was not movement within the ocean. It was movement entering it. Behind him, the corridor remained empty. No voices this time. No quiet arguments. Only distance. He leaned closer, trying to follow the shapes as they shifted again. And then the water changed. Not visibly, not at first, but something in the depth tightened, as if the vast space itself had drawn in a breath. The shapes broke formation, not scattered, withdrawn, gone in a direction too fast to track. Silence returned, complete, but it did not feel the same. Ackbar stepped back slightly, the panel now reflecting more of the interior than the sea beyond. For a moment, his own image overlapped with the dark water outside, still, watching, listening. The vibration did not return. The current settled. Everything resumed its usual pattern. Yet the absence felt deliberate, like a door closed just before it could be seen. He remained there longer than necessary, long enough to confirm nothing else would follow, long enough for the quiet to become familiar again. But something had changed. Not in the ocean. In him. Observation had become expectation. Stillness now carried questions, and for the first time, the patterns he trusted felt incomplete. He turned away from the glass, slowly, not rushed, but with a new awareness forming beneath the surface. Whatever had passed through those depths, it had not been meant to be seen, and yet, for a brief moment, it had allowed itself to be noticed. The quiet did not return to what it had been, not fully. Something had shifted beneath it, not visible, not spoken, but present in the way everything now seemed to hold, just slightly tighter. Ackbar felt it before he understood it, in the corridors, in the pauses between conversations, in the way certain doors remained closed longer than they should. No alarms sounded, no announcements followed, yet the city was no longer moving with the same ease. It adjusted, carefully, as if something beyond its walls had forced it to reconsider its own rhythm. He stayed away from the lower levels for a time, not out of fear, out of observation, watching how the rest of the city responded. Patterns again. That was where truth revealed itself. Security presence increased, subtle but consistent. Patrol routes shifted, not random, covering angles that had once been left open. Council members passed through the upper halls more frequently, their conversations shorter, more contained. The surface remained calm, but the structure beneath it had begun to reorganize. The ocean followed, not in resistance, in reflection. Currents that once moved in long, uninterrupted paths now broke around unseen disturbances. Migration routes altered slightly. Creatures that had followed the same paths for cycles began to hesitate. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw immediate concern, but enough for someone who watched closely. Ackbar returned to the observation levels, not the lower ones, higher this time, a broader view, more distance. From here, the sea stretched outward in layers, light fading into shadow, movement thinning into suggestion. He stood still, let the silence settle around him, then waited. It came slowly, not as shapes, not as motion, as absence. A region of water where nothing passed, no drifting life, no wandering forms, just space, clear, empty, wrong. His eyes followed its edges. There, a distortion, faint, like the water itself resisted what moved through it, not pushing against it, bending around it. A presence without outline, large enough to affect everything nearby, careful enough to reveal almost nothing. His breathing slowed, not from fear, from focus. This was no longer a pattern of creatures, no longer something the ocean had created. This was intrusion, measured, controlled, and aware of its own concealment. The distortion shifted, barely, but enough. Ackbar adjusted his stance, tracking, calculating distance, speed, direction. Instinct now shaped by everything the sea had taught him. Then it was gone, not retreating, not accelerating, simply no longer there, as if the ocean had closed over it, sealing the space behind. The water returned to normal, movement resumed. Creatures passed through the same region as if nothing had interrupted it. No trace remained, only memory. Ackbar did not move, not immediately. He remained at the glass, watching the space long after it had emptied, confirming, rechecking, searching for any sign he had missed something. There was nothing, but the certainty remained. This was not chance, not coincidence. Something had entered their world, not loudly, not violently, quietly, with precision, and it was learning. He stepped back from the panel, the reflection returning again. This time, it did not feel like a simple image. It felt like a question, not who he was, what he would do. The ocean had taught him to observe, to understand movement before reacting to it, to recognize the shift before the impact. Now, for the first time, the lesson demanded something more. Not just awareness, decision. He turned from the glass, the corridors beyond waiting, the city still moving, still pretending. But he no longer saw it the same way, because the water had changed, and once the water changed, everything above it would follow. It did not arrive as a warning, only as impact, a rupture in the rhythm he had come to trust. The water around Mon Cala changed first, traffic routes broken, defense craft moving too fast, signals crossing over one another in sharp bursts. Then sound followed. Not the deep, familiar sound of the sea, something harder, metal through water, engines forcing their way into a world that had not asked for them. By the time the full shape of it became clear, The moment for preparation had already passed. Ships, too many, descending with the cold certainty of power that expected no refusal. The city did not fall silent. It tightened. Every corridor seemed to narrow. Every voice lowered, then rose again. Orders moved through the chambers. Emergency routes opened. Security forces rushed toward points already under pressure. Nothing felt uncertain anymore. Only sudden, only fast. Ackbar stood among that change and understood very little of it at first. Not because he could not read the fear, because everything was happening at once. The old balance between caution and calm was gone. In its place came speed, sharp instruction, faces he recognized, now carrying expressions he had never seen on them before. He followed the movement of others through the upper passageways. A turn, another. Crowds pressed closer at each junction. Families pulled toward protected sectors. Officials moving in the opposite direction. A child crying somewhere behind him. The sound was brief, almost swallowed by the next alarm. No one explained anything. There was no time for explanation, only fragments, only names, only the sudden weight of a reality already inside the city. The invaders were not distant, not approaching. Here, Ackbar reached an outer viewing hall crowded with frightened voices and saw what the ocean had been trying to teach him. Dark forms beyond the glass, angular, mechanical, foreign in every line. Nothing in them resembled Mon Cala. Nothing curved, nothing breathed. They held position like weapons being aimed. Smaller craft moved beneath them, cutting through the water with brutal purpose. Around the city, defense batteries answered. Bursts of light flashed through the depths, then vanished into clouds of disturbed silt. For a moment, the view outside became confusion. Brightness, shadow, motion. Then one of the towers farther out took a direct hit. The shock reached them through the structure. A deep strike, far heavy enough to rattle the glass. Someone shouted. Someone else pulled others back from the wall. Ackbar remained still, one heartbeat longer. Long enough to see debris drift out into the dark. Long enough to understand that this was no probe, no hidden movement at the edge of sight. This was force. Open, immediate, absolute. The hall emptied quickly after that. Security ordered everyone inward, away from external sectors, away from any direct line to the water. Ackbar moved with the others, though more slowly now, his eyes still holding what he had seen. The shapes, the spacing, the discipline. It was invasion, but not chaos. Every movement outside had purpose, every angle chosen, every strike placed. Whoever had entered Mon Cala had not come uncertainly. They had come knowing exactly what fear could do before surrender ever began. The deeper corridors were already crowded by the time he reached them. Voices layered over one another, questions with no answers, rumors moving faster than facts. The Quarren were mentioned, the council, blockades, occupation, pieces, all of them. None complete. He kept walking, not because he knew where safety was, because standing still no longer felt possible. Then the first soldiers appeared. Not Mon Calamari, not Quarren, armor white against the dim interior lights, helmets without expression, blasters held with practiced indifference. They moved into the corridor as if they had always belonged there, as if the city had already been measured and divided before the first door was opened. Everything changed around that sight. Conversation collapsed. Bodies shifted backward. Some froze. Others lowered their heads. The soldiers said something in a clipped, hard language that carried command even where meaning failed. Ackbar did not know every word. He understood enough. Move, stop, down. The blasters made the rest clear. A figure near the front hesitated, only for a second. One soldier stepped forward and struck him down with the butt of his weapon. No speech followed, no warning repeated. The lesson had already been given. Ackbar's hands tightened at his sides. Not in defiance, in restraint. There were too many of them, too organized, too calm inside violence. He lowered his gaze slightly, not from submission, but to watch without drawing attention. The armor was clean, the formation exact. They were not angry. That felt worse. Anger left room for error. This did not. People were forced into lines, groups broken apart, directions shouted. Some were sent left, others driven forward through doors now controlled by armed strangers. Ackbar lost sight of familiar faces almost at once. A hand touched his arm from behind. An elder. Only for a moment. A silent urge to keep moving. Then even that contact was gone. The corridor bent, opened into a transport chamber. More soldiers, more weapons. Restraint cuffs passed from hand to hand in efficient sequence. Metal, cold, final. When they locked around his wrists, the reality of it settled deeper than the alarms ever had. This was no temporary panic, no brief seizure of control. Mon Cala had been entered, broken, and reordered in a matter of moments. And he, who had spent so long learning to read the signs before change arrived, now stood inside its consequence with chains around his hands. Around him, orders continued. Voices not his own. Authority with no familiarity in it. The sea remained outside, close, visible through narrow sections of reinforced glass. Still moving, still ancient, but unreachable now. Not gone, just separated. Held beyond walls and weapons and the will of those who had come from above. Ackbar looked once toward that dark water as the prisoners were forced forward. The ocean gave him no answer. Only its depth. Only the memory of patterns that had led him here, right up to the edge of the moment, and no farther. Then the line moved again, and Mon Cala, which had once felt endless, became a corridor, a command, a cage. The line did not stop. It only slowed, turned, pressed through spaces that had already been claimed. Voices filled the air, not loud, not chaotic, controlled. Each word placed with the same precision as the soldiers who spoke them. Ackbar did not understand all of it. He did not need to. Tone carried meaning. Sharp, unquestioned, final. They were being processed, sorted, reduced to movement, to numbers, to direction. The chamber ahead opened wide. Cold light. Metal surfaces. Nothing shaped for comfort. Nothing shaped for the sea. He was pushed forward with the others, hands bound, steps measured by the pressure of those behind him. At the center, officers stood apart from the soldiers. Dark uniforms, different posture, stillness that carried more authority than the weapons around them. One of them spoke. The language was not his. Hard edges, clean delivery, no wasted sound. A soldier beside Ackbar translated in broken basic. Remain still. You will be assigned. Assigned. The words stayed. Not freed, not questioned, placed. A Mon Calamari near the front tried to speak. Not loudly, not with defiance. A question. Simple. The officer did not answer. A gesture instead. 2 soldiers stepped forward. The one who had spoken was pulled aside, removed from the line, gone before anyone could follow where. The silence that followed was heavier than any order. Ackbar kept his gaze lowered, not fully, just enough to watch without drawing focus. He studied everything, the spacing between soldiers, the timing of their movements, the way commands passed without repetition. This was not disorder. This was structure imposed from outside. And it was working. Groups were separated with efficiency. Some directed toward transport platforms, others toward holding sectors. Ackbar's line shifted again. He was moved closer to the officers. Close enough now to hear more clearly. Fragments. Secure the docks. Resistance minimal. Quarren cooperation confirmed. That word, cooperation. It settled differently, not surprise. Confirmation of something already felt beneath the surface. The tension he had seen, the quiet fractures. They had not gone unnoticed. They had been used. Another voice entered. Lower, more controlled. Priority assets to be transferred off-world. Remaining population will be managed. The word held no uncertainty, only process. Ackbar's focus tightened, not on the fear around him, on the meaning beneath the words. This was not only invasion, it was conversion. The city would not simply be held, it would be reshaped, one decision at a time. Another prisoner stumbled near him, a slight misstep, exhaustion. A soldier corrected it instantly. No hesitation, no anger, just force applied where needed. The line corrected itself, continued. Ackbar adjusted his pace, matched the movement, watched how pressure was used, where it was applied, how quickly resistance disappeared when structure replaced it. He listened again, carefully. Admiral Tarkin will require... The name passed between officers, like something already understood, important, final, a direction above all others. Ackbar stored it, not as identity, as position. If decisions flowed downward, that name sat near the source. The line split, his group directed toward a side corridor, narrower, darker, fewer voices. The noise of the chamber faded behind them, replaced by the steady rhythm of marching steps, metal against metal, measured, unbroken. He glanced once to the side. Through a narrow opening, he saw another group being moved in the opposite direction. Faster, more tightly guarded, not random, never random. Everything had purpose. He returned his gaze forward, counted steps without realizing it, tracked turns, distance, time between commands. Even now, bound, outnumbered, removed from everything familiar, he continued to learn. Not because he chose to, because it was the only thing left that could not be taken from him. The corridor ended at a reinforced door. It opened without delay. Beyond it, another chamber, smaller, more contained, holding, not yet transport, not yet destination, just waiting. The line halted. For the first time since the capture began, silence settled again, not natural, controlled. Ackbar lifted his gaze slightly, just enough to see the soldiers reposition, to see the door behind them close, to feel the shift from movement to containment. And in that stillness, the voices from before echoed in his mind, assigned, managed, transferred, not spoken to him, not meant for him, but understood. This was no longer about survival in the moment. It was about what came after, and whatever came after would not resemble the world he had just been taken from. Stillness settled in the room, not the kind he knew, not the living quiet of the ocean. This one held edges, hard, defined, unmoving. The door sealed behind them, a final sound, low, certain. No current moved here, no distant call, only breath, and the faint hum of systems that did not belong to Mon Cala. Ackbar did not shift his weight, did not test the restraints. There was nothing to test. The cuffs were precise, tight enough to control, loose enough to allow movement when ordered. Everything here had been measured, even confinement. Around him, others reacted. Some whispered. Soft, urgent voices searching for answers that were not coming. Others stood rigid, trying to hold on to composure that had already begun to fracture. One lowered himself to the floor, slowly, as if the strength to remain upright had simply ended. No one stopped him. No one helped him. The soldiers watched, not with interest, with readiness. They did not intervene unless movement required correction. Nothing more, nothing less. Ackbar watched them instead. Their formation had changed, less spread, more contained. Two near the entrance, one at the far wall, another positioned slightly behind the group. Angles covered, no blind space. Even in waiting, they maintained control. A voice broke the quiet. From above, not spoken directly, transmitted, filtered through the room. Unfamiliar tone, cold in its clarity. Instructions, designation codes, movement orders. He did not understand every word, but he followed the pattern. Segments, groups, processing. Each phrase aligned with action that had not yet begun. Preparation before execution. He lowered his gaze again, not to hide, to think. The ocean had taught him movement. Now he watched stillness, how it held, how it waited, how it prepared to change without announcing it. Time passed. Unclear how much. There was no measure here, no shift in light, no external reference, only the steady hum. Then, a sound, different. From the far side of the chamber, a panel opened, not a door. A section of the wall sliding aside with controlled precision. More soldiers entered. Behind them, equipment. Not weapons, devices, scanning units, portable consoles. They moved through the group with the same efficiency as before. No hesitation, no variation. One by one, prisoners were pulled forward, separated, examined, recorded. The process did not rush. It did not slow. It maintained its pace, regardless of reaction. When someone resisted, even slightly, it ended quickly. Not with anger, with correction. A force applied, a body repositioned, the line restored. Ackbar's turn came, a hand at his arm, firm, guiding, not asking. He stepped forward, stopped where indicated. A device passed over him, close, silent, reading, collecting. Another unit focused on his restraints, checking, confirming. The officer nearby glanced at the display, brief, then moved on. No words, no recognition, only data. He was no longer an individual in their system, only a result, something categorized, filed, moved forward. The next prisoner replaced him without pause. Ackbar stepped back into position, but not as he had been before. Something had shifted again, not outside, inside the structure of what was happening. This was not temporary holding. This was intake, systematic, planned long before arrival. Every step accounted for, every response anticipated. He looked at the others again, not as individuals, as groups, how they were divided, who was moved first, who remained longer. Patterns began forming, subtle but present. Certain species, certain ages, certain physical conditions, all noted, all directed differently. He followed it, quietly, carefully. Then, a change. Small, but clear. Two officers entered behind the soldiers. Their presence altered the room without a word. Posture shifted. Movement tightened. Authority had increased. One of them spoke, lower than the others, measured. Transport priority adjusted. Selected units to be transferred immediately. Selected. The word carried weight. Not random, never random. A list existed, criteria defined. Ackbar felt the shift before he saw it. A soldier turned, looked directly at him, only for a moment, then checked something on the display. A pause, short, precise, then a gesture. Ackbar was pulled from the group, not roughly, not gently, simply moved, placed among a smaller line forming near the open panel, different from the others, fewer, more closely watched. The door at the far end opened, not the one they had entered through. Another, leading deeper, away from the chamber, away from the waiting, into something more final. Ackbar did not resist. He observed, counted again, steps, spacing, distance between guards, the weight of each decision unfolding around him. If this was selection, then purpose had already been assigned. He crossed the threshold, the door behind him closed, and the last connection to the group he had entered with disappeared. The corridor narrowed as it stretched forward, not just by design, but by intent. Every step felt guided, contained within limits that could not be ignored. Ackbar moved with the others beside him, fewer now, quieter, stripped of anything unnecessary. No one spoke, not because silence was chosen, but because nothing useful remained to be said. Ahead, the soldiers walked without turning. They didn't need to look back. The path allowed no deviation. Walls were smooth, seamless. No openings, no uncertainty, only forward. The air changed as they moved deeper, drier, heavier, less like a world that lived, more like something built only to function. A door opened, another chamber, smaller than before, but sharper in its purpose. Cold light reflected across metal surfaces, workstations arranged with precision, consoles waiting, not a place for holding, a place for use. They were positioned in a line, spaced apart more carefully now. Control increased with distance. Observation became easier. An officer approached, measured steps. No urgency, no delay. He stopped at the first prisoner and spoke in a calm, controlled tone. A soldier translated. "You will serve." No explanation followed. None was needed. The next received the same. Different voice, same meaning. Purpose assigned without consent. When the officer reached Ackbar, he paused. Only slightly, long enough to observe, to assess. A quiet exchange passed between two officers. Low voices, precise. Ackbar remained still, balanced, watching without drawing attention. The translation came, clearer this time. "You understand structure." Not a question, a conclusion. Ackbar did not respond. There was no instruction to do so. The officer studied him for one moment longer, then spoke a single word. Useful. Not approval, classification. He was moved aside, separated again into a smaller group. This one watched more closely, different from the rest. Tools were placed nearby, not weapons, instruments, navigation panels, damaged systems waiting to be restored. He looked at them and understood enough. Different design, sharper edges, less adaptation than Mon Cala systems, but still structure, still logic. One restraint was released. Only one. Control remained. "Work!" The command came without force, because force was no longer necessary. Expectation had replaced it. Ackbar stepped forward, slow, deliberate. He did not rush, did not hesitate. He observed first, mapped the system in his mind before touching it. Then he began. Small adjustments, testing response, correcting alignment. The work itself was not difficult, only unfamiliar. And unfamiliar could be learned. Behind him, the soldiers watched. Not constantly, but enough. Always enough. Time passed differently here. Not measured in waiting, but in completion. Task, correction, completion. Then another. No praise followed, no acknowledgement, only continuation. He understood quickly. This was not service. It was utilization. He was not being trained. He was being used. And yet, within that use, there was access, systems, processes, structure. He listened as he worked. Fragments of conversation between officers, technical terms, command sequences, operational language, each piece stored, connected. The same way he had once read currents beneath the sea. Now he read something else. Power. Not as force, as organization, as efficiency, as control applied without excess. He did not resist it. Resistance would end access. Instead, he learned it. Quietly, carefully, completely. A system revealed itself over time. How orders moved, how decisions formed, where authority gathered, and how it spread outward. Not through emotion, through design. That was the difference. The Empire did not rely on reaction. It relied on structure so complete that reaction became unnecessary. Ackbar adjusted another panel, restored function, stepped back, waited. A soldier checked the result. A single nod, no words. The next task was already in front of him, and in that moment, something settled. Not acceptance, not surrender, understanding. He was inside it now, not as a soldier, not as a voice, but as something more dangerous, a witness close enough to see how it truly worked. The ocean had taught him to observe before change arrived. Now the change had already come. What remained was learning how to see from within it. He lowered his gaze to the next task, hands steady, mind clear, still watching, always watching. Work replaced waiting. That was the first change. Not freedom, not relief, only motion with purpose, handed to him by those who had taken everything else. The chamber became familiar in the way prisons often do, not through comfort, through repetition. Panels arrived damaged, circuits failed, systems needed correction. Each problem was placed in front of him without explanation, as if skill itself had erased the need for speech. Ackbar learned quickly that the Empire valued usefulness more than understanding. If a task could be completed, the reason behind it did not matter. If an order could be obeyed, the life carrying it meant very little. So he worked, and while his hands moved, his mind remained elsewhere, watching, measuring, noticing what others ignored. Imperial systems were not elegant, not the way Mon Cala design had been. There, function often moved with form. Lines curved, structures adapted. Even machines seemed shaped to exist beside life rather than against it. Here, nothing adapted, everything imposed. A console did not invite use. It demanded precision. A corridor did not guide gently. It forced direction. Even silence felt manufactured, as though the walls themselves had been built to suppress anything unnecessary. At first, the differences seemed only aesthetic. Then he understood they were not differences in design alone. They were differences in thought. The Empire did not build for harmony. It built for compliance. That principle revealed itself everywhere. Tools arranged in exact order. Access limited by rank. Commands delivered in clear, narrow terms that allowed no interpretation. There was no wasted motion, but also no flexibility. Where Mon Cala systems expected living minds to adjust with circumstance, Imperial structure assumed obedience first and adaptation second. That made it powerful. It also made it vulnerable. Ackbar did not come to that conclusion immediately. He arrived there piece by piece, A delay in a maintenance request because authorization had not passed through the right channel. A soldier waiting for permission to move equipment that clearly needed moving. An officer rejecting a faster solution because it had not been entered in proper sequence. Again and again, he saw the same pattern. Efficiency, yes, but only within rules that could not imagine being broken. He kept this to himself. There was no value in expression, only in memory. The beings around him changed little from day to day. His stormtroopers remained faceless, their presence defined by posture more than identity. Technicians spoke in clipped terms, often more to the systems than to one another. Officers carried the cold certainty of those who believed structure itself justified power. Among them all, emotion was not absent. It was simply contained, pressed flat, allowed only where rank made it safe. Fear moved downward. Authority moved upward. Everything else stayed hidden. Ackbar watched how they looked at one another, not as companions, not even always as rivals, as positions, one level assessing another, one chain linked to the next. A soldier did not need to know the intention of an order. An officer did not need to care how it was carried out, only that it was. Responsibility narrowed as it descended. Power widened as it rose. That, too, he remembered. Sometimes he was moved to new workstations, sometimes left in the same chamber for longer cycles than he could count. The surroundings changed, the pattern did not. There was always a system within the system. Doors opening only after coded approval, reports submitted in duplicate, repairs logged before they were completed, as if documentation itself mattered as much as outcome. It would have felt absurd in another life. Here, it was law. One cycle, he was assigned to a larger operations room, not the center of command. Something beneath it, still important, still guarded. The damaged unit brought to him had been pulled from a tactical display console. He could tell from the circuitry, targeting overlays, fleet signal routing, communication layering. His work remained technical, but the information around it grew sharper. Projected maps flickered above nearby stations, sector lines, deployment paths, supply routes, names he did not yet know, repeated often enough to begin meaning something. No one invited him to understand any of it, but no one had to. He listened while keeping his eyes on the work. A sentence here, a designation there, a pause in conversation that told him which voices carried the greatest weight. The Empire spoke constantly, not always in words, sometimes in procedure, sometimes in silence, sometimes in the simple fact that one officer entered a room and everyone else straightened before he said anything at all. That was another lesson. Authority was rarely loud when it was secure. It did not need to be. The strongest command in the room was often the quietest. Ackbar adjusted a damaged interface plate and then paused with the tool still in hand. Two officers stood near the far display. Their voices were low, but their posture said enough. One reported, the other evaluated. No argument, no collaboration, only delivery upward and judgment downward. The exchange lasted seconds. When it ended, the reporting officer left with greater speed than he had entered. Ackbar returned to the panel. Another piece in place, another pattern understood. Survival had first taught him restraint. Now it taught him something else. Distance. Not emotional distance, analytical distance. If he let anger lead, he would only see cruelty, and cruelty explained very little. If he watched coldly, the shape beneath it emerged. The Empire was not strong because it inspired devotion. It was strong because it turned fear into structure and structure into habit. That habit reached everywhere, into doors, into speech, into the pace of footsteps in the hall. The more he saw, the less random it became. Imperial power was not chaos held together by force. It was order stripped of mercy. That was why it spread so easily. That was why worlds fell before they fully understood what was being done to them. He finished the repair and stepped back. A technician checked the panel, entered the result, then signaled for the next damaged unit without ever meeting his eyes. Useful. That word returned often now, even when it was not spoken. Useful beings were kept. Useful hands were directed. Useful minds were never meant to remain minds at all. Only functions. Ackbar accepted the next task. Not because he had accepted his place, because every circuit opened another small window. Every system revealed the habits of those who believed themselves untouchable. He no longer listened for the sea. There was none here, no current, no living depth, only the closed rhythm of imperial design. But the lessons had not left him. They had only changed form. He still read movement, still measured response, still watched for the moment when pattern became weakness. And somewhere inside that cold machinery, the first outlines of a new language began to form. Not spoken, not written, understood. The language of enemies. The commands rarely changed, only the voice delivering them. Different tone, same structure, short, exact, closed to interpretation. Ackbar began to notice how little variation existed in what they said. Even when the situation shifted, the phrasing did not. Proceed. Hold position. Await instruction. Every order carried its own boundary. Nothing extended beyond what was spoken. Nothing implied. That was the difference. On Mon Cala, meaning often lived between words. Here, meaning ended exactly where the sentence did. He adjusted a routing panel while listening. 2 technicians nearby exchanged updates. Not conversation. Transfer. Signal stable. Delay within acceptable range. No acknowledgement. Just continuation. The next statement replaced the last. No pause to reflect. No need to confirm understanding. The system assumed it, or demanded it. A soldier entered the chamber, stopped at a fixed point, spoke without looking at anyone directly. Unit reassignment, prepare. No explanation followed, no one asked. They moved, instantly, tools set aside, stations cleared. Even unfinished work left exactly where it was. Ackbar remained still for a moment longer, not resisting, observing. The speed of compliance, the absence of hesitation. Then he moved with them, matched the pace, blended into the motion. The corridor beyond was narrower than before, not by accident, designed to control flow, to prevent clustering, to maintain direction. Every turn reduced options. Every door reinforced sequence. Ahead, a pair of officers walked side by side. Their conversation was low, but the shape of it was familiar. Report, response, adjustment, delay unacceptable. Correction already initiated. No blame, no defense, only outcome. The problem existed. The problem was corrected. Nothing else mattered. Ackbar listened, then shifted his attention to something else. Not the words, the reaction. The officer receiving the report did not raise his voice, did not repeat the command. He simply accepted the correction and moved forward. Authority did not need to reinforce itself. It assumed obedience as a constant. That was the expectation. An expectation shaped behavior long before any punishment was needed. They entered another operations space. Larger, more active. Displays filled the walls. Movement tracked across them in clean geometric lines. Fleet positions. signal paths, control layered over distance. Ackbar was directed to a station without being told why. A damaged input array, faulty response timing. He understood enough. Began work, hands steady, mind elsewhere. Listening, always listening. An officer stood behind one of the central consoles. Still, completely still. Others moved around him, delivering updates. He did not acknowledge most of them, only the ones that mattered. The difference was subtle, but clear. Priority was not spoken. It was recognized. Ackbar watched the pattern. Who spoke first? Who waited? Who adjusted their tone when addressing that position? Hierarchy was not just written. It was performed. Again and again, until no one needed to think about it. That was when it became strongest. A signal flickered across one of the displays. Brief disruption. A minor fault. The technician at that station froze, only for a second, then looked toward the officer, waiting, not acting. Ackbar noticed the delay immediately. Small, but real. The system required permission before correction, even when the correction was obvious. The officer turned. One glance. Resolve. One word. Enough. The technician moved at once, hands faster now. But the moment had already revealed something. Without instruction, action paused, even when action was needed. Ackbar returned to his work, adjusted the array, corrected the timing. But his thoughts stayed with that moment. The system created efficiency, but it also created dependency. Remove instruction and movement slowed. Remove authority and direction fractured. He stored that, carefully, quietly. Another command moved through the room. Status. Voices answered in sequence, each one brief, each one contained. No overlap, no interruption. The order of response was not assigned. It was understood. That was the depth of it. The Empire did not just give orders. It shaped minds to expect them, to wait for them, to trust them more than their own judgment. Ackbar finished the repair and stepped back. A soldier checked the panel. Confirmed, moved on. No words, none required. The next task was already being placed. Always the next task, always forward, never reflection. He accepted it, not with agreement, with awareness. The more he watched, the clearer it became. Emotion had not been removed from this system. It had been controlled, restricted to moments where it could not interfere. Anger used downward, confidence projected upward, everything else suppressed, not eliminated, just contained. That made the structure stable, predictable, and predictability could be studied. He lowered his gaze to the new panel, tools in hand, movements precise, listening to commands that never changed, learning the spaces between them, where thought had once existed, and where, one day, it might return. He began to recognize it before anyone spoke. Authority did not need introduction. It altered the room simply by entering it. The air shifted, movement tightened. Even the quiet became more deliberate. Ackbar did not look up immediately. He felt it first. A change in pace behind him. Technicians adjusting posture without being told. Voices lowering, not out of fear, but alignment. Then he looked. An officer had entered. Not like the others. No rush. No display. Stillness carried forward with him, as if motion itself followed his decision. Those nearby made space without instruction, not stepping back in panic, shifting with awareness. The path opened because it was expected to. Ackbar watched carefully. This was different from rank alone. This was presence. Constructed, maintained, understood by everyone in the room without explanation. The officer stopped at a central console, said nothing. A report began immediately. Not requested, delivered, another followed, then another. Each voice measured, no overlap, no hesitation. Ackbar noticed something else. No one repeated information. No one clarified what had already been said, because repetition implied doubt, and doubt did not belong here. The officer listened, that was all, but it was enough. The silence around him was not empty. It was weight. Each word entering it had to justify itself, or it would not be spoken. One technician hesitated mid-sentence, only for a fraction of a second. The officer's gaze shifted, not sharply, not aggressively, just directed. The hesitation ended instantly. The report continued. Ackbar returned his focus to the panel in front of him, but his attention remained behind. Authority here did not rely on reaction. It prevented it. Everything moved correctly the first time, because correction carried consequence. Not always visible, but always understood. He adjusted a connection, paused, listened again. A new voice entered the exchange, lower, more controlled, different from the others. The room changed further, not dramatically, subtly, but enough. Ackbar looked again. Another figure had joined, uniform darker, posture unchanged by the presence of others. This one did not adapt to the room adapted to him. Names were not spoken loudly. They did not need to be, but Ackbar heard it in a quieter exchange nearby. Tarkin. The word passed carefully, not repeated, not emphasized, just placed. Ackbar stored it, not as identity, as position. Everything he had observed aligned around that presence. Reports shortened. Language became even more precise. Movement slowed, not from hesitation, but from control. No one rushed near him. No one filled silence unnecessarily. Even the systems seemed quieter, as if noise itself had been reduced. Tarkin did not raise his voice, did not issue commands in excess. When he spoke, it was brief, complete. Nothing followed that required clarification. Adjust deployment. No direction added, no explanation offered. And yet, movement began across the room. Officers relayed the command outward, each layer translating it into action without changing its meaning. Ackbar watched the flow, from one voice to many, from decision to execution. No confusion, no delay. This was authority at its most refined, not force applied repeatedly. Force applied once, then carried forward by structure. He understood then. Power here did not come from presence alone. It came from design so complete that presence only needed to activate it. Tarkin did not control every action. He controlled the system that controlled them. That was the difference. Ackbar lowered his gaze again, hands moving over the panel, outwardly unchanged. But something had shifted inside his understanding. Hierarchy was not just levels, it was flow, direction, compression of decision into smaller and smaller spaces until no room remained for deviation. And at the center of that compression stood figures like this, still, precise, unquestioned. He finished the adjustment and stepped back. A technician moved in, confirmed the result, logged it. The process continued. It always continued. But Ackbar's attention remained on the room, on how everything aligned around a single presence, on how silence itself became part of control. This was not the chaos of conquest, not the noise of domination. It was something colder, something quieter, a system where authority shaped behavior before action even began. He had seen strength before, in the ocean, in the great creatures that moved without challenge. But this was different. This was strength built not on size or force, but on understanding how to make others move without needing to be told twice. He turned slightly, just enough to see Tarkin one last time, still at the center, still unchanged, as if everything around him existed only to confirm what he already knew. Ackbar returned to his work, but the pattern remained, clear, complete, and far more dangerous than anything the ocean had ever shown him. He stopped looking for moments, started looking for connections. Not what happened, but why it always happened the same way. A delay in one chamber, a correction in another, an order given once, then carried through layers without change. Separate events, same structure beneath them. Ackbar worked at a navigation array, hands steady, mind moving elsewhere. He traced patterns across time now, not just space. What triggered response, what required approval, what moved freely, and what stalled without direction. It formed slowly, not a single realization, a shape assembling itself piece by piece. The Empire did not depend on constant control. It depended on predictable behavior. Every unit knew its boundary. Every officer knew their scope. Anything outside that waited. That waiting became the weakness. Small at first, almost invisible. A technician hesitating before initiating a fix. A soldier pausing for confirmation instead of acting. An officer rejecting efficiency because it did not follow sequence. Individually, nothing. Together, a pattern. Ackbar did not test it. He was not in a position to. He observed it, stored it, let it settle into understanding. The system worked because it reduced uncertainty. But in doing so, it reduced initiative. That balance held everything in place, until something disrupted it. He adjusted a circuit, then paused just long enough to listen. Two officers nearby exchanged a brief update. Awaiting confirmation, proceed only when cleared. The same structure, repeated again, no deviation. He finished the adjustment and stepped back. The technician checked the panel, logged it, moved on. Ackbar followed the next task, but his attention stayed wider now, not fixed on one station. On the whole, how information flowed, where it slowed, where it accelerated. He began to see pathways, invisible ones, not corridors, not wires, decision paths. If one point was removed, what followed? If one order failed to arrive, how long before movement stopped? The answers were not immediate, but they formed, gradually, quietly. A system that appeared unbreakable from the outside revealed its dependencies from within. Not flaws, requirements, and requirements could be disrupted. He did not think of escape, not yet. That was too direct, too simple. He thought of understanding, complete understanding, because only then would movement mean something. Only then would action matter. Another task, another repair. The rhythm continued, but now it felt different. Not something imposed on him, something he was reading from the inside. A language without words, a structure without explanation, and he was beginning to speak it, not aloud, not in action, in thought, in recognition, in the quiet alignment of every observation into something usable. Across the room, an officer issued a command, brief, unchanged. Movement followed, precise, expected. Ackbar watched it unfold, then returned to the panel in front of him, hands moving as required, mind moving beyond it. The ocean had taught him how to see patterns before change arrived. The Empire had shown him what happened after change took hold. Now, for the first time, he understood something else. Change could be shaped, not through force, through knowledge, through timing, through knowing exactly where a system depended on itself. He completed the task, stepped back, waited. The cycle continued, unbroken, unquestioned, but no longer invisible to him. And within that clarity, something new began to form. Not resistance, not yet. Something quieter, more precise. A way of thinking that did not belong to the Empire, but had been built by watching it closely enough. The system remained intact. That was what made the change so hard to see. Nothing collapsed. No sudden failure. No visible break in routine. Commands still moved through the halls. Repairs still arrived in steady sequence. Officers still measured worth by speed, silence, and compliance. From a distance, everything held. That was the surface. Ackbar learned to watch beneath it. A delay too small to be reported. A supply transfer marked complete, though one container never reached its listed station. A maintenance request redirected twice before disappearing entirely. Each detail meant little on its own. Together, they suggested friction. Not enough to stop the machine. Only enough to remind him it was not perfect. He kept working, hands precise, eyes lowered when needed, mind moving elsewhere. There were chambers now where he was trusted to remain without constant correction. Not freedom, never that. But the Empire had grown used to him. Useful minds became part of the structure they served. That was one of its blind habits. Once someone was assigned a function, the system preferred to believe the function would continue. It saved attention for larger threats. Ackbar understood that and used the quiet space it created. Sometimes the signs came through damaged equipment. Scored metal where the official report listed routine failure. Power relays burned out in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. A lock panel opened from the inside, then sealed again before inspection. Not open rebellion. Not yet. Something more careful. Something testing the edges. He never asked about it. Questions were noticed. Silence was safer. Silence also allowed him to hear more. 2 technicians, one station over, exchanged a brief comment while recalibrating a relay grid. Not quite whispers, not quite casual. Lower docks again. Someone is cutting routes. No reply after that. Only work. But the line remained with him. Lower docks. Cut routes. Not chaos. Interference. Purposeful. A shape was forming below the orderly surface, just as surely as the Empire's own patterns had formed around him. He began to sense 2 movements happening at once. Above, the structure of occupation, rigid, predictable, convinced of itself. Below, something quieter, unseen hands altering flow, unrecorded decisions made beyond sanctioned channels, a world answering back without yet revealing its face. That distance stayed with him. He served inside the upper machinery of Imperial control, learning its habits, its delays, its need for obedience. But somewhere beyond his reach, others were learning too. Not how the Empire functioned, how it could be troubled. The thought did not comfort him, it sharpened him. Because distance changed everything. Those resisting below could act. He could only observe. They moved through hidden corridors, submerged routes, private loyalties. He stood in lit chambers under armed supervision, useful enough to keep alive, watched enough to remain contained. The divide was not only physical, it was moral. They were already choosing. He was still waiting. That truth settled heavily, not as shame, as pressure. A reminder that understanding alone was becoming less enough with every passing cycle. One evening, or what passed for evening. Inside Imperial Rhythm, he was sent to inspect a communications array near a transport sector. The work itself was simple: a damaged interface, signal noise across a relay line. But the location mattered. Transport sectors collected movement, supplies, personnel, orders in motion. They also collected mistakes. Ackbar opened the panel and began the repair. Nearby, 2 officers were reviewing cargo transfers. Their voices remained low, practiced, flat, yet one phrase cut through the rest. Dockside disruption, then another. Local labor reassignment failed. The second officer paused, not from surprise, from irritation carefully controlled. Repeat the order. It was repeated. A silence followed, small, tight. Then someone is interfering. No raised voice, no visible anger, only conclusion. Ackbar kept his hands steady on the panel, did not turn, did not slow, but inside, the meaning settled clearly. This was no longer rumor. The Empire had noticed the drag beneath its own movement. The fractures were still small, still deniable, but real enough to reach command channels. He finished one connection and moved to the next. A reflection in the polished edge of the console showed stormtroopers passing behind him. More than before, not rushing, repositioning, quiet adjustments. That was how the Empire answered uncertainty. Not with panic, with layers, more patrols, more checks, more weight placed on the same structure until it held again, or cracked. So he stood and listened. From somewhere deeper in the sector came a sound too faint for most to notice. Not an alarm, not a machine failure, a metallic strike, brief. Then nothing. His eyes lifted only slightly. The guards near the far entrance shifted their posture. One touched the comlink at his helmet. No words carried back, only that small adjustment. Then stillness returned. The moment passed, or appeared to. Ackbar lowered his gaze again, but the feeling remained. The same feeling he had known in the waters of Mon Cala long before the invasion. A pattern disturbed, a current altered. The visible world continuing as if nothing had happened, while something beneath it changed direction. He was no longer only studying the Empire. Now he was studying the pressure building against it. And that made the space around him feel narrower than before, because 2 realities had begun to share the same walls. In one, he repaired the systems of those who had taken his world. In the other, unseen hands were starting to challenge them. One required patience, the other required nerve. Sooner or later, those realities would meet. And when they did, watching would no longer be enough. The disturbances did not stay where they began. They moved, quietly, carried through systems that were never meant to carry them. Ackbar noticed it first in the reports, not the official ones. Those remained clean, ordered, complete. It was the secondary layers, the corrections, the small adjustments added after initial submission. A number changed, a route revalidated, a delay explained twice. Each entry alone made sense. Together, they suggested something else. Information was being forced upward, carefully, reluctantly. The system resisted uncertainty, yet uncertainty had entered it, and now it had to be acknowledged. He stood at a diagnostic station while a communications grid recalibrated around him. Signal lines flickered across the display, clean paths interrupted by brief distortions. Nothing sustained, nothing obvious, but enough to leave a trace. A technician nearby leaned closer to his console, spoke without looking up. Reports from the lower sectors, another voice answered. Inconsistent. A pause. Then, increased verification. That was how it spread. Not as alarm, as doubt. Orders did not change in tone, only in repetition. More checks, more confirmations, more layers placed between action and certainty. Ackbar adjusted the input sequence. He slowed the calibration slightly. Not enough to be noticed. Enough to watch how the system responded. The delay triggered a request. Immediate, automated, authorization needed. He restored the original timing. The request cleared. The system returned to normal. He understood. Even the smallest disruption demanded recognition. And recognition created noise. Noise that traveled upward, through channels designed to remain controlled. 2 officers entered the chamber, their pace measured, but faster than before. Not rushed, just less still. They reviewed the display without speaking at first. Then one said quietly, "Pattern confirmed." The other did not respond immediately. When he did, the words were precise, localized. A moment passed. Uncertain. Uncertainty. The word did not belong here, yet it remained. Held. Examined. Not dismissed. Ackbar kept his focus on the console, but the shift in the room was clear. The Empire had begun to listen for something it could not yet define. That changed everything, because a system built on certainty did not adjust easily to doubt. It compensated, added layers, tightened control. But every addition slowed movement, even slightly. He followed the conversation as it moved away from him. Fragments only. Dock failures. Missing personnel. Route interference. The same pattern, now spoken openly, though still contained. Not broadcast, not shared widely. Restricted to those who needed to know. That was another habit. Control the spread of awareness. Limit it. Shape it. But pressure did not remain contained forever. It traveled. Through systems. Through people. Through repeated corrections that slowly became too many to ignore. Ackbar stepped back from the panel as the calibration completed. A technician confirmed the result, logged it, then hesitated. Only for a second. Long enough to check something again. Then again. Verification, already increasing. The effect had begun. He moved to the next station. Not directed, expected. His usefulness granted him movement within boundaries. And within those boundaries, he listened. The rumors were no longer whispers between workers. They had entered the structure. Not fully, not yet, but enough to change how orders were given, enough to make certainty feel thinner. A soldier passed behind him, then paused, checked a readout, checked it again, then continued. That was new, small, but new. Ackbar noted it. Every repetition, every second glance, every moment where the system required reassurance, because reassurance took time, and time created space. He reached the next console, opened the panel, began work, hands steady, movements precise, the same as always. But the environment had shifted, subtly, irreversibly. The Empire was still in control, still structured, still absolute in appearance. But now it was reacting, and reaction meant something had reached it. Not visibly, not yet, but undeniably. He adjusted the final connection and closed the panel. Waited. The system confirmed. The process continued, as it always did. But the rhythm was no longer untouched. Somewhere below, something was pushing upward, and for the first time, the Empire was beginning to feel it. He could not see them. That was the distance, not measured in corridors, not in sealed doors or guarded routes. something deeper. He worked inside light and metal. They moved somewhere beyond it, in water, in shadow, in places the Empire had not fully mapped. Two worlds, existing at once, never touching. Ackbar felt it most in the moments between tasks, when the system paused just long enough for thought to return. He would stand at a console, waiting for the next instruction. And in that still space, the memory of Mon Cala returned. Not as images, but as movement, currents shifting, paths bending, life adjusting without command. Down there, nothing waited for permission. Everything responded. That was the difference. Here, action followed order. There, action followed need. He carried both understandings now, but could act on only one. A technician approached his station, placing a damaged relay beside him. No words exchanged, none needed. The work began, hands moving, circuits opening. But his attention split again, listening outward, feeling the absence of something that once surrounded him. The ocean had always been present. Even in silence it spoke. Here, silence meant nothing. It held no guidance, only containment. Yet traces remained. Not of water, of resistance. A signal delay routed through a channel that should have been clean. A power fluctuation too precise to be accidental. A corridor sealed for maintenance that reopened without record. All small, all disconnected. Unless you knew how to see them. Ackbar did, because he had learned to read what was not directly shown. Still, he could not reach it. That was the truth that stayed with him. Those below could move, could act, could choose. He remained fixed in place, part of the structure he was studying. Close enough to understand, too far to intervene. That separation pressed against him, not as frustration, as weight, because knowledge without action began to feel incomplete. He adjusted the relay, then paused, not from uncertainty, from thought. If the system above depended on order, and the movement below depended on freedom, then the point between them mattered. The place where control met resistance, where instruction met adaptation. That was where change would happen. Not fully above, not fully below, between. He closed the panel and stepped back. A soldier checked the result, approved, moved on. Ackbar remained where he was for a moment longer, watching the corridor, measuring distance, not in steps, in possibility. A group of workers passed by under escort, different from before, not technical. Labor moved with less precision, more force applied to maintain order. One stumbled, recovered. The line continued. The guards did not slow. That was another difference. The system adapted more easily to those it trusted, less to those it did not. Control varied, not evenly, not perfectly. Another pattern. He stored it, turned back to the station. Another task already waiting. Always another task, always forward. But now, something had shifted in how he saw it. This was no longer only observation, it was positioning, understanding where he stood within the structure. Not at the center, not at the edge, somewhere in between. And that was where movement could matter. Not yet, not fully, but soon. He could feel it. The pressure from below growing, the system above tightening in response. Two forces moving toward one another, inevitable, unseen by most, clear to him. Because he had learned both languages, the still, controlled speech of the Empire, and the silent, shifting motion of a world that refused to remain still. The distance remained, but it was no longer empty. It was filling, with tension, with possibility, with the sense that when the two finally met, no structure, no matter how precise, would remain unchanged. It was not a single moment, not one decision. The change came in layers. So quietly, it could have been mistaken for routine. A reassignment that placed him closer to transport routes. A longer interval between direct supervision. Access widened only slightly enough. Ackbar did not question it. The system preferred continuity. A function that worked was allowed to keep working. That was its habit, and habits created openings. He stood at a junction console, reviewing a damaged interface tied to dockside routing. Ships moved through this sector. Cargo, personnel, orders carried in physical form. Movement mattered here. Mistakes mattered more. He opened the panel, worked, listened. A pair of officers passed behind him. Their exchange was brief. Increased screening. Already implemented. No change in tone. Only more layers added. The structure tightening around something it could not yet see. Ackbar adjusted a relay, then slowed his hand for a fraction of a second. Watched the system respond. A verification ping. Immediate. Expected. He restored the timing. The ping cleared. Everything returned to normal. He had not disrupted anything, only measured. That was enough. Another task arrived. He completed it. Another. Then stillness. Short. Unclaimed. In that space, he looked up. Not fully. Just enough to take in the corridor beyond. Traffic moving in controlled lines. Guards repositioning. A transport door cycling open and closed at steady intervals. Predictable. Repeatable. Reliable. That was what made it vulnerable. He turned back to the console. Closed the panel. Logged the repair. Waited. No instruction came. That was new. Not an error. An omission. Small, but real. The system had not accounted for him in this moment. No task assigned. No direction given. For the first time since his capture, there was space. He did not move immediately. Stillness first. Observation. The guards at the far end shifted position. One turned slightly away to respond to a signal. The other remained. But his focus split. Not complete. Not perfect. Ackbar noted the distance, the timing, the rhythm of the door cycle. Open, close, pause, repeat. He stepped forward, slow, measured, no sudden motion, no break in pattern. He moved as if directed, as if this had already been ordered. No one stopped him, not yet. One step, then another. Each movement placed within expectation. The system did not question what appeared correct. That was its strength. That was its weakness. He reached the edge of the junction, paused. Not from hesitation, from alignment. The door ahead opened again. The same interval, the same sound. Beyond it, another corridor, less guarded, less central. Transition space. He could feel it. Not freedom, but movement away from control. Behind him a voice called out, not sharp, not alarmed, a routine check. He did not turn, did not respond. He kept walking. The call did not repeat, because repetition implied doubt, and doubt had not yet formed. He passed through the doorway. The corridor beyond narrowed, then bent out of direct sight from the junction. The noise of the main sector faded, replaced by a quieter rhythm, less controlled, less watched. He stopped only once, half a step, listened. No immediate pursuit, no alarm, nothing. The system had not recognized the break, not yet. Ackbar continued forward, not faster, not slower, exactly as before, because the safest movement was the one that did not appear to change. Behind him, the Empire remained intact, ordered, certain. Ahead, the path was unclear, unmapped, not guaranteed, but it existed, and that was enough. For the first time since the chains closed around his wrists, the choice was no longer abstract. It was movement, real, irreversible. He did not look back, because looking back meant acknowledging the break, and the system did not yet know it had been broken. So he moved forward, quietly, precisely, carrying everything he had learned inside a structure that had never imagined he would leave it. He was already moving before the choice had a name. Not running, not hiding, just continuing forward through a corridor the Empire had failed to close around him. That was the difference. Defection did not begin with a speech or a sudden act of courage. It began the moment he understood that staying in place would become its own kind of surrender. The path ahead curved left, then dropped through a service passage where the light dimmed and the sound of the main sector thinned behind him. Ackbar kept his pace even. Fast movement invited attention. Slow movement invited memory. So he chose the rhythm least likely to be remembered. At the lower junction, a sealed door waited beside a maintenance console. Imperial design, simple, rigid. He had seen its pattern before. Input sequence, verification pulse, delay, release. His hands moved with the calm he had learned inside captivity. No wasted motion, no second attempt. The lock opened. He stepped through and closed it behind him. Still no alarm. Still no raised voices. The system had not yet understood that one of its assigned functions had slipped outside the line. Beyond the door, the corridor changed. Less polished. Older. Part Mon Cala, part occupation. Native structure interrupted by Imperial reinforcement. For the first time in cycles, the world felt divided beneath his feet. He followed the older route, not because he knew where it led, because Imperial control always sat more heavily on the obvious path. Twice he stopped to listen, once for footsteps overhead, once for the distant grind of a cargo lift moving somewhere behind the walls. Nothing approached directly. Nothing turned toward him. The opening remained. That was enough. Then the air changed. Not much. Just enough to carry moisture again. A trace of the world he remembered. Salt. Depth. Pressure held somewhere beyond the metal. He stood still for one brief moment and felt the truth settle fully inside him. This was no longer observation, no longer patience, no longer surviving within their system to understand it. He had crossed the line already. What came next would not be measured by how well he served or how carefully he listened, only by whether he could remain in motion long enough to vanish from the shape they had built around him. Ahead, the passage widened into shadow. Ackbar moved toward it without hesitation. The Empire had not lost him yet, but it already would. Movement became the only language that mattered. No clearance. No assigned path. No voice confirming the next step. Only direction chosen in silence and held without hesitation. Ackbar followed the older structure as it dipped lower, where Imperial control thinned and Mon Cala design still held its shape beneath the occupation. The corridor curved with the logic of water, not machinery. It did not force him forward. It allowed it. That difference guided him more than any map could. Behind him, the system continued. Orders given, reports filed, corrections made. His absence had not yet entered that flow. Not because it could not be seen, because it had not been checked. That was the delay, the space he had measured. Now he moved inside it. At the next junction, a patrol crossed ahead. White armor. Measured steps. Their formation tight. Their focus forward. They did not expect deviation here. Ackbar slowed, not stopping, not turning. He shifted his path just enough to align with theirs, as if his presence belonged within the pattern. For 3 seconds, he walked parallel, close enough to be counted, not close enough to be questioned. Then the corridor split. They continued straight. He did not. The separation passed without notice. That was how it worked. The system trusted its own structure more than what stood inside it. He used that. Further down, the lighting dimmed again. Panels flickered where Imperial power had not fully stabilized. Native systems still pulsed beneath the surface. Old circuits, old pathways, less efficient, more alive. He reached a maintenance access point and opened it without pause. Inside, the space narrowed. Metal gave way to older material, curved walls, organic shaping. The memory of the ocean returned more strongly here, not visible, but present. He moved through it carefully, not rushing, listening. The further he went, the less he heard of them. No commands, no footsteps, only distant mechanical vibration fading behind him. For the first time since his capture, the Empire felt distant, not gone, but no longer immediate. That distance carried risk, and something else, choice. He paused at a vertical shaft leading downward, dark, unmarked. No Imperial reinforcement, no visible control, only depth. He considered it. Not long. There was no certainty in this path, no guarantee it would lead anywhere useful. But certainty belonged to the Empire, and certainty had kept him inside their system. He stepped into the shaft, used the embedded grips along the curved wall, descended slowly, each movement placed with care. Below, the air thickened again. Moisture increased. The trace of open water stronger now. Not imagination, real. He reached the base and stepped into another corridor, this one fully Mon Cala in its design, unmodified, untouched. The Empire had not reached everything, not yet. He moved forward, and for the first time, his direction was no longer shaped by them, not by command, not by reaction, by decision. That was the difference, subtle, but final. Behind him, the system would continue to operate. For a time, it would process tasks, check logs, follow sequence, and eventually, it would notice. But by then, the line he had crossed would no longer be something it could close. The delay ends without warning, not with noise. With a check, a name called into a channel that expects an answer. None comes. The system does what it always does. It repeats, clearer. No reply. A small flag appears in a log. Routine at first, then it persists. That is when it begins. Up in the transport sector, a console marks a missing task. A repair not logged, a worker not present, no alarm, only a note. A second check follows. Authorization requested. Cross-reference initiated. The structure turns its attention inward, slowly, carefully. A soldier is sent to confirm. He reaches the junction where Ackbar last stood, finds the console closed, the worker complete, no one assigned. He reports. The tone does not change, but the direction does. A supervisor reviews the record, sees the gap, a movement that does not align with sequence. He does not question loudly, he escalates. That is how it travels, upward, layer by layer, each level adding weight, each level removing doubt. By the time it reaches an officer, the absence is no longer small. It has shape, it has consequence. Orders shift. Quietly, a corridor is sealed, another is scanned. Patrol routes adjust by a fraction, enough to cover the space that should not exist. In the operations room, a report is delivered. Short, contained, unit unaccounted. The response is just as brief. Locate. No urgency. Not yet. Because the system trusts its correction. trusts that nothing escapes its reach for long. Search patterns begin, predictable ones. Return paths checked first. Authorized routes reviewed. Doors logged and reopened. The Empire looks where it expects to find him. That is its method. That is its limit. Below, in the older passages, Ackbar keeps moving. He does not hear the order. He does not need to. He understands the timing, knows the window is closing. The rhythm above is tightening. He feels it in the faint vibration through the walls, in the distant hum shifting in tone, control increasing, pressure redistributing. He turns through a curved passage and pauses at a narrow opening. Listens. Nothing immediate. No boots. No voices. But the space feels different now. Not empty. Searched. The difference is subtle, but clear. He moves again. Faster now. Not enough to draw attention. Enough to stay ahead of it. Above, the search expands. Not chaotic. Never chaotic. Structured. Teams assigned. Sectors divided. Reports flowing upward. Each failure narrowing the field. Each cleared path pushing the focus elsewhere. His absence becomes a point, a center. Everything begins to move toward it. An officer reviews the last confirmed location. Sees the sequence, the gap, the moment where expected motion stopped. He understands, not fully. Enough. He did not deviate. A pause. Then he aligned. The realization forms, small, sharp. The system has been used, not broken, used. That changes the search. Patterns shift. Less reliance on recorded movement. More attention to what should not have been possible. But the delay remains. Always the delay. Ackbar reaches a sealed hatch at the end of a lower corridor. Different from the others. Older. Manual. He places his hand against it. Feels the pressure beyond. Water. Closed now. Real. The mechanism resists. Not designed for speed. He works it carefully. No force. No noise. Behind him, somewhere far above, the Empire closes its lines. The absence is no longer a note. It is a problem. Soon, a threat. The hatch opens. A narrow passage beyond. Wet. Dark. Uncontrolled. Ackbar steps through. Does not look back. Because by the time they fully understand what he has done, he will no longer be part of the system they are searching. He will be something else. Something they cannot track the same way. And that is the moment they lose him. Water returns before sight does. A change in pressure. A softness in the air. The sound of movement not shaped by machinery. Ackbar steps forward and feels it settle around him. Familiar, patient, alive. The passage opens into a submerged channel, dimly lit by scattered panels that no longer follow imperial order. Light drifts instead of holding. Shadows move with it. For a moment, he does not move. Not from uncertainty, from recognition. This is not escape. Not yet. This is return to something the Empire could not fully replace. He lowers himself into the water, cold, steady, real. It closes around him without question. No command required. No permission given. Movement changes at once. Not forced. Guided. His body remembers before thought does. The rhythm returns. Distance measured differently now. Not in steps. In flow. Behind him, metal and structure remain. Ahead, the channel widens. He moves through it, careful, controlled, using the current instead of fighting it. That is what the ocean had always taught. Do not resist what already moves. Use it. Above, the Empire continues to search. Doors open, routes close, orders repeat. But none of it reaches here in time. Because this space does not belong to their system. It does not respond to their commands. It does not record their presence. It simply exists. And that is enough. Ackbar surfaces briefly at a narrow pocket of air, listens, nothing immediate, only distant water shifting through larger tunnels. No voices, no boots, no structure pressing inward. He moves again, deeper, further, each turn guided by instinct, shaped long before the Empire arrived. The path is not marked. It does not need to be. The flow itself reveals direction. That is something the Empire never learned, never needed to. Their power does not follow currents, it replaces them. But here, replacement has not reached, and so they cannot follow. The channel bends sharply, then opens into a larger cavern. Faint light filters from above. Natural, uneven, alive. Ackbar slows, not from caution, from understanding. This is the edge, the point where he is no longer within their reach. It's not because they cannot pursue, because they cannot think the way this place requires. He looks once toward the passage behind him, dark, still, unchanging. No sign of pursuit, no signal, no presence. The system has ended, not destroyed, simply left behind. He turns forward. The water carries him into open space, wider, less contained, not yet free, but no longer owned. And in that quiet shift, something final settles. He is not a missing unit, not a failed assignment, not a function removed from a system. He is outside it, beyond its structure, beyond its control. No longer something the Empire can define, only something it has lost. He moves forward without hesitation, because the decision had been made long before this moment. This was only where it became real. Nothing here moves the way an empire does. That is the first truth. Not after the water, not after the tunnels, not after the long, careful break from everything that had once defined his days. Ackbar enters the rebellion through fragments, a hidden chamber, a coded exchange, faces that study him before trusting him. No banners waiting, no fleet assembled in neat formation, only pieces. Cells cut off from one another, supply caches counted by hand, ships arriving damaged, leaving half repaired, then returning with different crews and different orders. Everywhere he looks, there is purpose. But purpose alone is not structure. One group speaks in urgent whispers over star charts spread across a metal table. Another argues over fuel, routes, missing contacts, and whether a message from 3 sectors away can be trusted. A pilot asks for clearance from someone who has no authority to give it. A commander gives an order that never reaches the people meant to hear it. No one intends disorder. That is what troubles him most. The will is there. The courage is there. Even discipline in places. But discipline without connection only creates islands. And islands do not become a fleet by wanting to. He listens more than he speaks. That habit has survived everything. Briefings half finished. Coordinates repeated differently by different voices. Reports delivered from memory because no one had time to record them properly. The rebellion survives on instinct, speed, sacrifice. It does not yet know how to survive on continuity. Ackbar sees the strain immediately, not weakness, strain. A dozen efforts pulling toward the same goal, but not always in the same direction. A transport arrives with medical supplies no one requested. Another world requests support no one can spare. 2 captains prepare for the same mission, each believing the other was reassigned. No failure is dramatic. That is what makes it dangerous. Confusion rarely announces itself. It accumulates, quietly, through overlap, through assumption, through good intentions moving too quickly to notice where they collide. He stands near a projection table while voices rise around him. Not from anger, from urgency. Everyone here has already lost something. time, worlds, people. None of them can afford delay, and yet delay lives in every missing link. Ackbar watches the map flicker, ships with no common pattern, routes with no central logic, command without cohesion. For the first time since escaping the Empire, he sees a different kind of danger, not control that crushes, freedom that cannot yet organize itself. And somewhere inside that realization, a new task begins to take shape. Not escape, not survival, arrangement. Voices overlap before meaning settles. One briefing begins while another has not finished. A name is spoken in one corner, repeated differently in another. Ackbar stands at the edge of it, listening as if the room itself is trying to decide what it wants to be. No one holds the center. That is the absence, not leadership. Alignment. A pilot gestures at a star map, tracing a route that shifts with every interruption. Another interrupts with new coordinates, received moments ago, unverified. A third insists the window has already closed. All of them right. None of them connected. Ackbar does not step in. Not yet. He watches how decisions form or fail to. Someone gives an order. It travels halfway across the room, then breaks against another instruction moving in the opposite direction. Both continue. Neither completes. That is the pattern, not defiance, displacement. He follows the sound instead of the words, where voices rise, where they fall, where silence appears unexpectedly. That is where confusion gathers. A technician calls out for confirmation on a transmission. No answer. He repeats. Still nothing. He sends it anyway. Hope replaces certainty. Ackbar marks that moment, not the error, the cause. No clear path for response, no structure to carry it. Elsewhere, a captain waits for clearance that never arrives. He launches anyway. Action replaces coordination. It works. This time. That is what allows the pattern to continue. Success without structure hides the cost. A group near the far wall argues over a supply drop. Timing, escort, destination. Each voice pulls from a different report. All incomplete, all urgent. Ackbar moves closer, not to interrupt, to listen at the point where decisions fracture. He hears the same thing repeated in different forms. We thought, we assumed, we were told. Assumption has replaced command. That is the danger. In the Empire, assumption does not exist. Everything is defined. Here, everything is alive, changing, unfixed. That makes it harder to control and easier to lose. A message arrives, late. The room shifts around it. Someone adjusts a plan, another rejects it. A third tries to merge both. The result holds for a moment, then breaks again under new information. Ackbar studies the timing, not the content. When decisions are made, when they are abandoned, how long a plan survives before it changes. There is no rhythm, only reaction. That is what keeps them alive. That is what will destroy them if it remains unchanged. He steps back from the table. The map continues to flicker, routes appearing, disappearing, replaced before they can settle. No one notices him. That is useful. He can see without being asked to act. For now, a young officer approaches him with a datapad. Hesitation in the movement, not fear, uncertainty. You were with them, the officer says quietly. Not a question, a recognition of where Ackbar came from. Ackbar looks at the display. Disorganized entries, partial logs, fragments of something that could become a system if it were given shape. He does not answer immediately, but instead he studies the gaps, the missing links, the places where structure should exist but does not. Then he returns the datapad. Your information arrives, he says. A pause. Your decisions do not. The officer holds the words without responding. Not rejection. Consideration. That is different from the Empire. Here, thought still has space, even in urgency. Ackbar turns away. The room continues as before. Voices rising, plans shifting, nothing resolved. And yet, something has begun. Not in the system. There is no system yet. In the awareness of what is missing. He listens once more. Not to what they say, to what they cannot yet hold together. Because that is where structure must begin. He does not begin by speaking. He begins by placing things where they can be seen. A table cleared, not completely, just enough. Star charts pulled closer, not rearranged, aligned. One route beside another. One report next to the message that should have answered it. He creates proximity first. Meaning follows. Voices continue around him, unchanged. But a few begin to lower as they notice the shift. Not authority, clarity. A pilot steps closer, watches the lines, says nothing. Ackbar marks a path across the chart, not as an order, as a reference. Here, he says, one word, no instruction attached. The pilot follows the line with his eyes, then looks to another route, sees where they cross. The connection had always been there, unseen. Now it holds. A technician brings a data pad, places it beside the chart, entries still incomplete. But now they sit against something stable. The gaps become visible, not hidden inside separate conversations, visible in one place. That changes how they are handled. Another officer approaches, points to a sector. Delayed, he says. Ackbar nods once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. He moves a marker slightly, shifts a route, not to correct, to reveal timing. The delay now sits between two actions, not floating, defined. The officer sees it, adjusts his plan without being told. That is the difference. Instruction forces action. Understanding invites it. The room begins to change. Not all at once. Gradually. Voices shorten. Less explanation. More reference. People begin to point instead of argue. Here. After this. Before that arrives. The language shifts. From reaction to relation. Ackbar does not control it. He does not need to. He only holds the space where it can exist. A message comes in. Late. As usual. But this time it does not break the plan. It finds its place within it. Someone adjusts a marker. Another updates the timing. The structure absorbs the change. That is new. Ackbar steps back slightly, not leaving, creating distance, watching how the room continues without him moving the next piece. A captain enters, looks at the chart, pauses. For the first time, there is no immediate question, only recognition. He nods once, moves to a console, issues a command, clear, short, connected to what is already in place. The order travels, does not break, does not conflict. It holds. That is the beginning, not of control, of coordination. Ackbar notices something else. Silence appears, not empty, structured. Moments where no one speaks because nothing needs to be said. Those moments did not exist before. Now they do, and they matter. He studies the flow, how information moves across the table, how decisions form faster, but not through pressure, through alignment. The chaos has not disappeared. It has been given edges, and edges allow direction. A young technician looks up from his console, meets Ackbar's eyes. There is no question this time, only understanding. Something has changed, not imposed, built, from fragments placed close enough to connect. Ackbar turns his attention back to the chart, adds nothing new, only adjusts what is already there. Because structure is not created by adding more. It is created by linking what already exists. The rebellion does not notice the moment it shifts. There is no signal, no declaration, only the quiet realization that plans are beginning to hold, and that holding creates something they did not have before, a line between chaos, thin, fragile, but real. It does not appear all at once, not as ships gathering in formation, not as a command spoken and obeyed. It begins in how movement stops breaking, roots hold longer, messages arrive and find a place instead of starting again. Orders do not replace each other. They build. Ackbar watches it form without calling it anything. A transport leaves when it should, arrives where it is expected. Not because it was forced, because everything around it now supports that outcome. A pilot checks a path, finds it unchanged. For the first time, he does not ask again. He proceeds. Trust begins there, quiet, unspoken. A second ship adjusts its course mid-flight, not reacting, aligning. The change travels through the chart, through the room. No confusion follows, only correction that fits. Ackbar steps away from the table, further this time. He does not need to stand at the center anymore. The connections remain without his hand holding them in place. That is the sign, not control, continuity. A message comes in, late, as always, but it no longer fractures anything. It settles into the pattern. A delay becomes a shift. A shift becomes a new timing. The structure absorbs it, adapts, holds. That is what the Empire never allowed. Change without breaking. Here, it becomes strength. A captain issues an order, clear, brief. It moves outward, not as a command to be obeyed blindly, as part of something already understood. The response comes back faster, not rushed, connected. Ackbar listens, not to the words, to the absence of conflict within them. Fewer overlaps, fewer contradictions, more alignment. The room breathes differently now, not quieter, more focused. Silence appears at the right moments. Speech fills the right spaces. Nothing spills over, nothing collides. That balance holds, for now. A larger projection activates above the table. Multiple sectors, multiple movements. At first, it looks like the same chaos he saw before. Then, it settles. Patterns emerge, not imposed, discovered. Ships that never met begin to move as if they know each other. Routes align without direct contact. Separate cells act within the same timing. That is the change. They are still scattered, still outmatched, still incomplete, but no longer isolated. Ackbar watches the map stabilize, not into order, into coordination. There is a difference. Order can be broken. Coordination adapts. A pilot returns from a run, reports success. No celebration follows, only acknowledgement. The mission connects to the next. And the next, momentum replaces reaction. That is new. A fleet does not require ships alone. It requires relation, connection between movement, shared timing, shared direction, even without shared space. Ackbar sees it clearly now. They do not need to become what the Empire is. They need to become something it cannot easily predict. Something that moves without waiting for a single voice, but still moves together. That is harder, but stronger. He turns slightly, looks across the room. No longer scattered individuals, not yet a unified command. Something in between, something forming, a structure without rigidity, a system without a single point to break. He does not name it. Names come later. What matters is that it holds. For the first time, it holds. Ackbar steps further back, into the edge of the room. no longer at the center, no longer needed in every decision. That is how he knows it is real, because it continues without him. The shape is there now, not complete, not visible from a distance, but undeniable from within. A fleet without a face, without a single command to destroy, without a pattern simple enough to predict. And because of that, for the first time since the Empire arrived, something exists that can stand against it, not with greater power, with better movement, better timing, better understanding. Ackbar watches it settle, not as a finished thing, as something alive, something that will change, adapt, survive. And in that quiet moment, he understands his place within it, not as its voice, not as its symbol, as the one who saw how it could exist before it knew itself. Everything aligns, too clean, too smooth. Signals arrive on time, coordinates match across every channel. Fleets move as if they have always been one. Ackbar stands within the command deck, watching the projection stabilize in a way he has spent cycles trying to achieve. Now it holds on its own. No correction needed. No adjustment required. That is the first warning. Perfection does not exist in war. Not like this. Not across so many moving parts. A fleet forms in orbit, positioning exact, spacing maintained. No delay between commands and response. The structure he helped build now operates without friction. For a moment, it feels like success, the kind that does not need to be questioned. That is what makes it dangerous. Reports come in, shield generator located, ground teams deployed. No resistance beyond expectation, losses minimal. Everything fits too well. Ackbar does not speak, he watches, listens to the rhythm beneath the words. Something is missing, not information, uncertainty. There is no hesitation in the reports, no disruption in timing, no sign that the Empire is reacting, only receiving, allowing. That is not how they operate. The Empire does not yield space, it controls it, always. A captain confirms the next phase, clear, confident. The fleet prepares to advance, weapons ready. Attack pattern set. Ackbar studies the formation, the angles, the approach vectors. Every movement calculated to strike with precision, to overwhelm before resistance can form. It should work. By every measure, it should work. And yet, something holds back. Not in the fleet. In him, a memory. Not of battle, of structure, but of systems that never allowed uncertainty to appear on the surface. The Empire did not remove chaos. It concealed it, used it, shaped it. He looks at the projection again, sees the gap, not in space, in behavior. No interception, no disruption, no attempt to break formation. The Empire is not reacting. It is waiting. That realization does not arrive as panic. It settles, cold, precise, a pattern recognized too late to ignore. He steps forward, voice measured, not raised. Hold. The word cuts through the command flow, unexpected. A pause follows, brief, but real. Eyes turn toward him, not questioning yet, just noticing. A commander responds, "We are within optimal range." Ackbar does not look away from the display. That is why we wait. Silence again, this time longer. Because doubt has entered, and doubt does not belong here. Not in a moment that appears this certain, but certainty is the problem. He studies the fleet, the enemy position, the absence of movement, everything in place, except resistance. That is not victory. That is preparation. The realization sharpens, not sudden, inevitable. The Empire has not been caught. It has arranged this. Every clean signal, every clear path, every perfect alignment, guided, allowed, designed to bring them here, together. exposed. A voice begins to protest. He does not hear the words, only the pattern repeating. Confidence, momentum, the belief that success has already been achieved. He interrupts it, not loudly, but firmly. This is wrong. The words land differently, because they are not reaction, they are recognition. He turns slightly, enough for the command crew to see the certainty in his posture. They are not unprepared. A pause. Then they are ready. The room shifts. Not chaos. Not yet. But the first fracture appears. The plan, the one that held so perfectly, no longer feels stable. Ackbar looks back to the projection. Everything still aligned, still clean, still waiting. And now, clearly, waiting for them. The break does not come as noise. It comes as confirmation. A signal returns, late by a fraction, then another, clear, unmistakable. The shield is still active, not failing, not weakening, active. The surface team's report fractures mid-transmission. Words cut, reformed. Generator intact. A pause. Then, we cannot. The channel collapses into static, not interference, termination. Ackbar does not move. He does not need to. The pattern has completed itself. Around him, realization spreads, not evenly, not all at once. Some still hold to the plan, to the expectation that something can still be corrected, but the structure beneath that belief has already shifted. A commander turns sharply. Target the generator again. Another voice overlaps. We have no line of fire. A third. Then adjust the fleet. The words begin to collide. For the first time since the operation began, alignment breaks. Not because of failure, because the truth no longer fits inside the plan. Ackbar watches the projection. Still perfect, still stable. And now, completely false. A new signal appears, not from the surface, from above. A distortion. Then, light, green, sharp. A line cuts through space from the shadow of the station. One ship vanishes, not damaged, not disabled, gone. The display updates, too quickly. Loss registered, position removed. Another beam, another absence. The fleet does not scatter. It cannot. The formation that made them strong now holds them in place. That is the second realization. The trap is not only where they are, it is how they are arranged. A voice breaks through the command layer. Urgent now. Enemy fire confirmed. No one needed the confirmation, but the system requires it, requires every step to be named, even when the outcome is already visible. Ackbar steps forward again, closer to the projection, closer to the center. His voice remains level. Break formation. For a fraction of a second, nothing happens, because the order does not fit the plan. Then, movement. Ships begin to shift. Not all, not at once, but enough. The pattern fractures. Lines bend, spacing collapses. Coordination strains. Another beam fires. This time, it misses the intended alignment. The loss is reduced. Still real, but no longer perfect. That matters. Above them, the station reveals more of itself. Hidden structure unfolding, power routed, weapons cycling. This was never defense. It was timing. Everything held until they were exactly where they needed to be. The realization spreads fully now, not spoken, understood. The Empire did not wait for them to attack. It waited for them to commit, to lock into position, to become predictable. A captain calls out. "We are exposed," Ackbar answers without looking away. "We always were. The difference now, they know it. That changes everything. The fleet begins to move faster, less clean, less perfect, more alive. Coordination strains under pressure, but it does not collapse. Because it was never rigid, It was built to adapt. That is what holds them now. The first loss came from stillness. The next will come from how quickly they can move away from it. Ackbar studies the projection. The trap is no longer hidden. It is active, visible, and closing. But visibility is enough, because what can be seen can be answered, not prevented, not undone, answered. He turns slightly, voice steady, no panic. Redirect all units. A pause. Then, do not hold position. The command travels, different from before, not precise in shape, precise in intent. Survive, adapt, break the pattern they expect. Around him, the room has changed. No longer aligned in certainty, now aligned in response. Faster, sharper, real. The plan is gone. What remains is movement, and movement is the only way out. The map refuses to stay still. Vectors redraw before the last set settles. Calls overlap, then separate, then align again in fragments. Ackbar does not chase every change. He chooses anchors, one ship, then three, then a corridor of space where fire is thinner. He builds from there. Shift to staggered lines, he says, quiet enough to cut through the noise. Do not mirror the last turn. A pilot answers without waiting for clearance. Understood. That matters. Not obedience. Recognition. A carrier drifts too close to the firing lane. Ackbar marks it. 2 degrees port, now. The correction comes before the next beam. Not perfect. Enough. A near miss replaces a loss. Around it, smaller craft break from symmetry. No clean arcs. No easy targets. The formation dissolves into motion that cannot be predicted at a glance. It looks like disorder. It is not. It is pattern without repetition. He listens for delay, for the gap between order and action. Finds it in one sector. Cuts it out. Local command. Act on sight. Do not wait. The phrase spreads, shortens as it travels. Act on sight. That becomes the rule. Across the deck, a signal officer hesitates over a routing change. Ackbar does not look at him. Send it. The transmission goes. Late becomes useful. The channel holds. A cluster of fighters dives through a gap the station did not expect. Not a strike. A distraction. Power shifts to meet them. That creates a second gap. He marks it. Move there. Not through. Around. The wording matters. Around keeps them alive. Through would not. A captain begins to request confirmation. Stops mid-sentence. Issues the order instead. That matters more. The fleet learns in motion, not from instruction, from consequence. Another beam fires. Tracks a pattern that no longer exists. It clips empty space. Ackbar notes the delay between charge and release, counts it, holds it, then speaks. On the next cycle, break early. The timing passes across channels, uneven, imperfect, but shared. The next shot comes. They are already gone, not far, just enough. The miss is small. The effect is not. Confidence shifts, on both sides. He feels it, not as emotion, as change in behavior. Imperial fire adjusts, searches, their predictability thinning. Good. That is where pressure lives. He leans into it. Widen intervals, keep links. Not tighter. Wider. Connected, but not bound. Ships answer. Not in unison, in relation. That holds. A transport reports damage, minor, recoverable. He does not pull it out. He routes a screen across its path. Protection by position, not command. It survives the next pass. That becomes a lesson others copy without being told. The map keeps moving, but it no longer feels like collapse. It feels like current, shifting, carrying. He remembers the water, not as memory, as method. Do not fight the force, redirect it. He watches where the station commits power, where it hesitates, where it cannot decide between targets. That hesitation grows with every unpredictable turn. He uses it. Split attention, he says. Make them choose. Fighters dart. Cruisers drift just enough to threaten. No single focus. Too many edges. The station answers all of them, which means none of them fully. The next volley weakens, not in strength, in certainty. That is enough. Ackbar steps back half a pace, not retreat. Perspective. The fleet is no longer what it was at the start. It cannot be. But it is not broken. It has changed shape, under pressure, in real time. That is what keeps it alive. He does not look for victory, not here, not now. He looks for continuation, for the next minute, then the next, because survival is a chain, not a moment. He speaks again, softer. Keep moving. It spreads. Simple, clear. No structure to memorize. Only direction to hold. And the fleet holds it. Through fire, through loss. Through the narrowing space of a trap that is no longer perfect. Not because the Empire weakened. Because the pattern they relied on no longer exists. Ackbar watches the lines redraw. Not clean. Not stable. Alive. That is enough. For now. The pattern does not return. It evolves. What once held them in place now begins to turn outward. Not by force. By pressure applied in the right places. Ackbar watches where the station commits. Where its fire concentrates. Where its attention lingers just a moment too long. That is where it can be moved. Draw them wide, he says, voice steady. Do not meet the fire, pull it. Fighters shift, not attacking, inviting response. The station answers. It always answers. That is its nature. Power follows threat, and threat can be shaped. A cruiser drifts into the edge of a firing lane. Just enough. The beam tracks it, charges, releases, and misses as the ship rolls away at the last second. Energy spent, time lost. Ackbar marks the interval, then speaks again. Now, the command travels. Not as a single order, as timing shared across those who can feel it. Multiple ships move at once, not together, not mirrored, aligned. They cross the space the beam just vacated, not to strike, to occupy. The station must respond. It does, but slower now, because its last action still echoes through its systems. That delay matters. He builds on it. Shift left sectors. Keep them turning. The fleet moves, dragging the station's focus across a wider arc, forcing it to choose again and again. Each choice costs it something, not power, precision. The clean targeting begins to blur. A shot lands wide. Another follows, corrected, but late. Ackbar sees it. The first sign. Not weakness, strain. The trap was designed for stillness, for predictability, for a fleet that held shape long enough to be measured. That fleet no longer exists. What remains cannot be mapped the same way. He leans forward slightly, eyes on the projection. Hold pressure. Do not close. Important. Too close. And the trap regains form. Distance keeps it broken. A pilot acknowledges. Another adjusts without speaking. The movement spreads. Not perfect, not identical, but connected, always connected. A new signal breaks through. From the surface. Fragmented, incomplete. Shield, compromised. Static. Then silence. Ackbar does not react outwardly, but the meaning settles. Another front has shifted. The pressure is no longer one-sided. He does not announce it. Not yet. The fleet cannot afford distraction. It must hold this shape, this motion, this uncertainty. He turns his attention back to the station. Its fire patterns changing again. Searching, adapting, but not fast enough. Not to this. Continue, he says. One word. Enough. The fleet answers, not with a single movement, with many, small, precise, unpredictable. The station fires again, hits one target, misses two others that should have been caught. The balance shifts, slightly, but enough to feel. Ackbar straightens, not in relief, in recognition. The trap has not been escaped, it has been altered, turned from certainty into risk. For both sides, that is the best outcome available, and it is enough, because risk spreads, it forces change, it breaks perfect systems. He watches the projection hold this new shape, fluid, unfixed, alive. The Empire still holds power, still commands the field, but no longer completely, no longer perfectly. And that is where survival becomes possible. Ackbar steps back, just enough to see the whole, not the parts, not the fire, the movement, the flow. The fleet does not look like an army, not anymore. It looks like something harder to define, something the Empire cannot easily calculate. And because of that, it continues, through the trap, not untouched, but not destroyed. He holds that moment, not as victory, as transition, the point where collapse was expected and did not come, where structure bent and became something stronger. He speaks once more, quiet, certain. Stay with it. The words pass through the fleet, not as command, as understanding. And they hold, together, not because they were ordered to, because they have learned how. The movement slows, not all at once, not everywhere, just enough to be felt. Commands arrive, but with space between them. Reports come in, but without urgency pressing behind each word. The rhythm that once held everything together begins to loosen. Ackbar stands within it and notices the difference immediately. Not relief, not yet. Something quieter. The absence of constant pressure. The battle is over. That is what they say. That is what the reports confirm. The Empire has fallen. The structure that once controlled entire systems has fractured beyond recovery. Ships drift without command. Outposts go silent. Chains of authority break one level at a time. It should feel complete. It does not. Because the silence that follows is not empty. It carries uncertainty, a different kind. On the command deck, fewer voices speak at once. Not because coordination has improved, because there is less to react to. The enemy no longer moves as a single force. It dissolves. Fragments, remnants, pockets of resistance that do not follow the same pattern twice. Ackbar watches the projections, no longer clean lines, no longer opposing formations. Now, scattered points, unpredictable, unconnected. That is harder to read. A fleet can be studied, a system can be understood, but fragments, they require something else. He listens as reports arrive. One sector secure, another unstable. A third reports Imperial forces regrouping under no clear command, each piece true, none of them forming a complete picture. That is the new problem. There is no center, no single point to break, no structure to dismantle, only remnants that continue to act, then each according to its own purpose. The war has ended, conflict has not. That distinction settles slowly. A technician adjusts a projection, expanding the field. More space, more unknowns. Ackbar studies it, not looking for patterns, looking for absence of them, where nothing connects, where action appears without warning, where movement cannot be predicted by previous behavior. That is where attention must go. A commander approaches, report in hand, voice steady. Sector cleared. Ackbar nods, but the word does not hold. Cleared. It implies completion, an end. He knows better. Nothing here ends. It shifts. The commander waits for further instruction. There is none. Not because it is withheld, because the next step is not clear. That is new. He feels it. The gap between action and direction. Before, the system demanded immediate response. Now, response requires interpretation, judgment. That is harder. He turns back to the projection, sees a cluster of signals flicker at the edge of range, unverified, uncertain. He does not act immediately. He waits, not from hesitation, from necessity, because acting too quickly now could create the very instability they are trying to prevent. This is not battle. This is something slower, something that requires restraint. The crew shifts around him, less rigid, less compressed, but also less certain. They are used to reacting, to being given direction that fits within a clear objective. Now the objective changes. Not destroy, not survive, stabilize. And stability does not come from speed. It comes from balance. Ackbar understands that, even if the system around him does not yet. A report comes in from another sector. Local leadership requests support. Another from a different region. Same request. Different conditions. Different risks. Different outcomes. No single answer fits both. That is the challenge. Before, one strategy could be applied across the entire conflict. Now, every decision must be shaped to its place, its context, its consequence. He issues a command, short, measured. Assess before deployment. The words travel, not with urgency, with weight. Some expect more detail, more direction. It does not come, because giving too much structure now would recreate the same rigidity that once held the Empire together. That cannot happen. Not here, not again. He watches the response, slower, but more deliberate. Each unit begins to think, not wait. That is the shift, small, but important. The silence after the war is not peace. It is transition, a space where old systems no longer apply and new ones have not fully formed. Ackbar stands within it, not as a commander facing an enemy, as something else, a point of balance, between action and restraint, between control and freedom, between what was and what must come next. Victory should have carried a clearer shape, a line crossed, a banner raised, a moment everyone could point to and say, there, it is done. Instead, it spreads unevenly, from world to world, from system to system. Some celebrate before the fighting has even ended nearby. Others wait, uncertain whether the Empire is truly gone or only changing its face again. Ackbar sees this in every report. Not triumph. Variation. One planet opens its ports at once. Another locks down tighter, afraid that disorder will arrive faster than freedom. A third sends thanks and requests protection in the same transmission. That is what victory looks like now. Not one event, many reactions, none of them aligned. The New Republic begins to speak in the language of restoration, aid, recognition, transition. Good words, necessary words. But words do not create order by themselves. They only announce intention. And intention, Ackbar knows, is rarely enough. He studies a cluster of requests moving through the command channels. Food shipments, mediation teams, security escorts, infrastructure support. All urgent, all justified, all arriving faster than any single system can properly answer. During the war, scarcity had been expected. Now it becomes political. Who receives help first? Who waits? Who decides? Those questions do not sound like battle, but they carry the same weight. A commander enters with a dispute from two neighboring sectors. Both claim priority. Both fear what delay will bring. Neither is entirely wrong. Ackbar listens, says little, because the problem is not hidden in the argument. It is in the absence of a standard that both sides trust. Under the Empire, force settled such things. Crude, immediate, final. That cannot be the answer now. But without it, every decision risks becoming a wound of its own. He dismisses the officer and returns to the projection. No battle lines, no clean fronts, only systems recovering at different speeds, under different pressures, with different memories of what rule has meant. Victory does not erase those memories. It exposes them. Some worlds remember resistance. Others remember survival. Some collaborated because they believed there was no other choice. Some benefited. Some were crushed. Now all of them must exist inside the same future. That is harder than winning a war. It requires more than strategy, more than coordination. It requires patience strong enough to survive disappointment. A transmission opens from a local council newly restored to power. Their tone is formal, careful. Beneath it, fear. They ask for recognition, support, a visible sign that the new republic will not abandon them once imperial remnants return. Ackbar hears the real request beneath the words. Can we trust this victory? He does not answer immediately, because certainty would be easy and false. Instead, he offers what can be given. Presence, commitment, measured support, enough to hold. Not enough to promise what cannot yet be guaranteed. That restraint follows him now. He has learned the cost of systems that speak too absolutely. The Empire promised order and delivered fear. The new republic cannot promise peace unless it is prepared to build it slowly. That means accepting something difficult. Victory has no single shape because the future does not arrive evenly. It must be made, again and again, sector by sector, decision by decision. A logistics officer pauses beside his station, waiting for approval on a shipment reroute. Ackbar studies the request, not the route, the consequence. If these supplies move here, another world waits longer. If they do not, unrest may grow in the sector requesting immediate aid. No clean answer, only trade, only judgment. He approves the reroute, then orders a second review of the delayed region, not to solve the imbalance, to keep it visible. That matters now. Nothing can be allowed to disappear inside process. That was how empires survived. Through distance, through abstraction, through turning lives into numbers that no longer felt attached to consequence. He will not allow that. Not if he can help it. The deck remains quieter than it once was, but the quiet no longer feels like calm. It feels like thought, calculation without enemy fire, pressure without impact. The kind of strain that leaves no wreckage in space, only fractures in trust if handled badly. Ackbar understands that trust is the real battlefield now, not won once, maintained, or lost. And unlike fleets, trust does not move when commanded. It moves when watched carefully, answered honestly, and held through uncertainty. He looks across the projection again, not for threats, for imbalances, for places where absence is beginning to matter more than presence. A secured route with no civilian traffic returning. A restored system still requesting escorts it should no longer need. A quiet world with too little communication. These are not victories. Not yet. They are conditions, possibilities. What comes after war is not shaped by who survived it alone. It is shaped by who can build something that does not resemble what came before. That is the work now. Slower than battle, less visible, in some ways, more fragile. Ackbar stands in the middle of that truth and feels no triumph in it, only responsibility. Because a victory without shape can still collapse. If no one gives it one, the structure begins to form. then slips, not all at once, in small places first. A route that held yesterday no longer does. A system declared stable sends a quiet request for support again. A council agrees on policy, then fractures when it must be applied. Ackbar watches it happen without surprise. Order has been declared. But declaration is not the same as stability. He sees it in the reports that repeat with slight changes. Same issue, different location, different cause, same result. Something that should have held does not. A supply chain falters, not from attack, from assumption. One world believed another would compensate. The second believed the first had already adjusted. Neither was wrong. Neither was connected. The gap appears, and within it, shortage. A small thing, until it spreads. A local dispute escalates, not into violence, into refusal. Ships held back. Resources delayed. Trust thinning. No enemy needed. The fracture grows on its own. Ackbar studies the pattern, not looking for blame, looking for repetition, where the same weakness appears under different conditions. That is where structure must change. A commander presents a solution, more oversight, stronger directives, clearer authority. It would work, for a time. Ackbar considers it, then sets it aside, because he recognizes the shape. It is familiar, rigid, efficient, and dangerous. The Empire held its order through pressure, through control that allowed no deviation. That system did not fail because it was weak. It failed because it could not adapt. He will not rebuild that, not even in a different form. Instead, he looks for something harder, something slower, a system that holds, but can bend. He issues a different instruction. Link the sectors. No details. Not yet. The commander waits, expecting more. Ackbar does not provide it immediately, because the answer is not in a single command. It is in how those commands connect. Shared reporting, he adds, across boundaries. The meaning settles gradually. Not stronger control, more connection. If one system falters, another sees it sooner. If one delay forms, it does not remain isolated. That is the idea. Not preventing failure, reducing how far it can spread. The commander nods, not fully convinced, but understanding enough to begin. That is all that is needed. The first attempts are uneven. Data arrives too late, or too early, or without context. Confusion follows. For a moment, it appears worse than before. Ackbar allows it, because instability is part of adjustment. Without it, nothing changes. Gradually, alignment improves. Not perfect, not consistent, but present. A supply delay is caught before it becomes shortage. A dispute is identified before it hardens into refusal. A system requests help and receives it before asking again. Small shifts, quiet, but real. Order begins to hold, then slips again, in a different place, under different pressure. That is expected. Ackbar does not try to eliminate it. He studies it. Each failure teaches something the previous one did not. Patterns emerge, not fixed, but recognizable. He adjusts, not the whole structure, only the points where it weakens. That is the difference. The Empire rebuilt everything at once, imposed order across all systems, whether they could sustain it or not. Ackbar builds where it is needed, when it is needed. Allows variation where it does not break connection. That creates something uneven, but resilient. A technician reports a communication lag between two distant sectors. Minor, easily ignored. Ackbar does not ignore it. Because small delays grow, he redirects a relay, shortens the path. The next report arrives sooner. The difference is slight, but cumulative. These are the changes that matter now, not dramatic victories, not decisive battles, adjustments that prevent collapse before it begins. He stands at the edge of the command deck, watching the system breathe, expand, contract, hold, slip, then hold again. Order exists, but not as something fixed, as something maintained, continuously, deliberately, never assumed. That is the lesson. The war ended because a rigid system could not survive pressure. What comes after will survive only if it remains flexible enough to change under it. Ackbar understands that. Even if those around him are still learning, he does not rush them, because rushing creates the same fractures they are trying to prevent. Instead, he watches, adjusts, connects, again and again, until the structure begins to feel less like something imposed and more like something shared. Not perfect, never perfect, but holding, long enough to build something that might. It does not announce itself. No fleet appears. No signal declares the beginning. It arrives in smaller ways, a shipment that never reaches its destination, a patrol that reports nothing, then goes silent, a world that stops answering, not out of defiance, but fear. Ackbar studies each one. Separately, they do not look like war. Together, they form something familiar. Not an enemy, a condition, instability. It spreads without needing command, without needing coordination. That is what makes it dangerous. There is no center to strike, no leader to remove, only pressure applied in places that are already weak. He watches a sector report flicker on the edge of the display. Civil unrest, not violent, not yet, but growing. A delay in aid, a misunderstanding between local authorities. Enough to begin. He does not send ships immediately. That would solve the surface, not the cause. Instead, he redirects communication, brings voices into alignment before action follows. Slower, but it holds longer. Elsewhere, remnants of Imperial command attempt to regroup, not as a unified force, as fragments clinging to what they remember. Old authority, old structure. They issue orders no one fully obeys. But some do, enough to create disruption. Ackbar does not treat them as a fleet, because they are not. He treats them as sparks, each one capable of becoming something larger if left alone. Containment, not confrontation. Isolation, not destruction. That is the approach. A captain questions it. Why not eliminate them? Ackbar answers without turning. Because they are not the problem. A pause. Then, they are a symptom. The captain does not respond. But the idea remains. War, as it was, had clarity. Enemy, objective, outcome. This does not. It shifts, adapts, appears where conditions allow it, disappears when pressure arrives, only to return elsewhere. Ackbar recognizes the pattern, not from battle, from observation, from the systems he studied inside the Empire. Control suppressed instability, but it never removed it. Now, without that control, instability surfaces freely. That is not failure. It is exposure. The system is revealing where it cannot yet support itself. That is where effort must go. Not everywhere, where it matters. He issues a series of quiet adjustments, reassigns a unit, delays a deployment, redirects a diplomatic envoy instead of a patrol. Each decision small, each one connected. The effect builds, not visible at once, but present. A sector stabilizes, another follows, a third still struggles. That is acceptable, because progress is no longer measured by total victory, only by whether collapse is prevented. A report arrives, short, clear. A region previously unstable now holds. No further incidents. Ackbar reads it once, then sets it aside. No satisfaction, only confirmation. The approach works. For now. That is enough. He looks across the projection again. Not for enemies. For tension. For places where pressure is building quietly. Where the next fracture might appear. Because this war, if it can be called that, is not fought with fleets alone. It is fought with awareness, with timing, with understanding of systems that do not behave like enemies, only like environments. He stands in that space, between conflict and order, between reaction and intention, and understands something fully now. The war did not end, it changed. And in that change, his role did too. No longer breaking systems, not even shaping them alone, holding them, long enough for something stable to emerge. That is harder. That requires patience. And patience is not something war teaches easily, but it is what comes after. The reports do not arrive together. They never do. One appears at the edge of a long channel, marked low priority, a patrol noting debris where no conflict was recorded. Another follows days later. Different sector, different crew, same absence of explanation. No clear cause, no confirmed enemy. Ackbar reads them without comment, sets them aside. Not dismissed, not elevated, held. That is how these things begin. Not as warnings, as irregularities. A third report comes through. Delayed, partially corrupted. A transport rerouted by unknown authority. Authorization code valid, but untraceable. That is new, not impossible, but unlikely. He does not react outwardly. The system around him continues as before. Requests, allocations, stability efforts that never fully complete. These reports do not interrupt that flow. They sit beside it, quiet, unconnected. That is what makes them easy to ignore. A commander glances at one of them, shrugs. Outer sector noise. A reasonable conclusion. Ackbar does not correct him. Not yet. Because the evidence does not support a different answer. Not clearly. He returns to the projection, watches the usual patterns. Supply lines, communication routes, minor conflicts rising, then settling. Nothing here reflects the reports he has read. No disruption, no visible change. That is the second detail. If something is acting, it is doing so without disturbing what can be easily seen. That requires intent, not chaos. He stores that thought, does not speak it. A message arrives from beyond a mapped boundary, faint, intermittent. It carries no standard identification. She's only fragments of positioning data, too incomplete to confirm, too structured to dismiss entirely. A technician flags it. Signal drift, he suggests. Ackbar studies the pattern, not the content, the spacing, the repetition. It is not random, but it avoids forming anything complete, as if something is transmitting, but not revealing. He says nothing. The signal fades before further analysis can be completed. No trace remains. That is the third detail. Presence without persistence. Action without confirmation. Each report alone is nothing. Together, they begin to suggest something else. Not an enemy. Not yet. A condition forming, at the edge of perception. He does not raise an alert. There is no basis, no target, no defined threat. Only signals that do not repeat in ways the system understands. That is not enough, but it is not nothing. He adjusts a monitoring relay, quietly, extends its range. No announcement, no change in priority, just awareness expanded. If something exists beyond the current field, it will not remain unseen forever, not if he can help it. The rest of the command deck continues unchanged. Voices steady, reports routine. No sense of urgency, no recognition of anything beyond the visible. Ackbar remains still within it, listening to something that does not fully exist yet. Not in the system, not in the reports, only in the space between them. That is where it begins. Always. More fragments follow, never enough to settle into certainty. A convoy arrives late, its route altered twice by instructions no office can fully trace. A listening post logs a burst of encrypted traffic at the edge of known space, then nothing for weeks. An outlying contact reports organized movement in a region officially marked quiet. Each report reaches the surface of command, then drifts, not ignored, not fully believed. That is the pattern now. The evidence keeps appearing, but it does not connect in ways others trust. Ackbar studies the timing instead of the claims. When the signals appear, how long they remain, what follows them. There is discipline in the gaps. That is what unsettles him. Random threats behave like weather. They flare, they scatter, they contradict themselves. This does not. It withholds, carefully, as if something beyond the reach of current maps understands exactly how much to reveal and how much to leave unfinished. A junior officer brings him a compiled summary. Sector anomalies, unverified contacts, supply routes observed, then lost. The document tries to force coherence onto it. Dates aligned, regions grouped, threat levels assigned. Ackbar reads it once, then sets it down. The shape is wrong, too clean. The real danger is not in what repeats clearly. It is in what almost repeats. A pattern that approaches visibility, then recedes. Just enough to stay deniable. That takes patience. And patience, when attached to force, is never harmless. He begins comparing the reports against absences, not what was seen, what should have been seen and was not. A patrol passes through a corridor of space that should hold civilian traffic, finds nothing, no wreckage, no signal clutter, no local chatter, only emptiness, too complete. Elsewhere, an observation node records engine signatures for a few seconds. Large mass, controlled burn, formation implied by spacing alone, and then the record cuts off. Not by damage, by silence. Someone shut down the noise before it could become a trail. That detail stays with him. Not concealment after contact, concealment as method. He says little about it. The New Republic is full of visible problems. Border tension, reconstruction failures, local unrest. Those things demand immediate attention because they can be named. This cannot. And unnamed threats are always asked to wait behind louder ones. Ackbar understands why. He still does not like it. A strategist across the chamber reviews one of the latest entries and gives the conclusion others prefer. Incomplete intelligence. No strategic value. Again, reasonable. Again, dangerous. Because something without visible value can still carry intent. He does not argue in front of the room. That would only harden resistance. Instead, he asks for expanded cross-sector review. Quietly, traffic deviations, authorization irregularities, long-range sensor drift, not a warning, a net. If the pattern refuses to form in one place, then it must be followed across many. The first results only deepen the discomfort. Nothing decisive. No clear signature, no confirmed fleet. But the same type of uncertainty appears too often and too far apart to belong to chance alone. Routes touched, then abandoned. Signals structured, then broken. Presence suggested, then withdrawn. It is not enough to prove, only enough to feel. And feeling, in command, is rarely accepted as evidence. So he waits, not passively, carefully, watching a pattern that will not hold still long enough to be named, which, in its own way, tells him exactly what it is. Something learning how not to be seen. Something patient enough to remain small until the moment for remaining small no longer matters. That is when he begins to understand the true shape of the problem. Not absence of evidence, evidence shaped to remain incomplete. And that means someone, somewhere beyond the current edge of certainty, is already preparing for the day. These fragments will no longer need to hide. The noise fades, not everywhere, not completely, just in certain places. Ackbar notices it when a region that should carry constant traffic begins to quiet without explanation. No distress calls, no routine chatter, no signal interference, only absence. Clean, too clean. He studies the silence the way he once studied movement, because silence, when it appears like this, is not emptiness. It is control. A corridor of space holds no civilian routes, no cargo signals, no minor transponders flickering in and out of range. Nothing accidental, nothing lost. Everything simply gone. That is not natural, not even in the outer systems. A technician reports the drop, attributes it to migration, to fear, to shifting trade lanes, all possible, none sufficient. Ackbar does not correct him. He expands the observation field instead, wider, deeper, looking for the edge of the silence, because silence always has a boundary, and boundaries reveal intent. The edge appears, not sharp, gradual. Signals begin to return as distance increases, faint at first, then normal. That means the silence is not everywhere, only where it has been placed. He marks it, not as territory, as behavior, a pattern of absence repeating across multiple distant regions, never large enough to draw attention, never close enough together to form a clear line, but similar, consistent, deliberate. Another report arrives. A scouting vessel enters one of these quiet zones, finds nothing, no debris, no trace of disruption, only empty space where activity should exist. The vessel withdraws. Nothing follows. No pursuit, no signal, just nothing. That is what makes it difficult to act on. There is no threat present, only the suggestion that something has already passed through and removed what would have revealed it. Ackbar considers deploying deeper reconnaissance, then pauses, because if something is shaping silence this precisely, it will notice intrusion, and it may not respond in ways that can be easily understood. Observation must remain light, careful. He redirects long-range sensors, not to scan directly, to listen indirectly. Echo patterns, gravitational drift, minor distortions that cannot be fully erased. Even silence leaves a trace. It just requires patience to find it. Days pass, then weeks. The quiet zones do not expand rapidly. They shift slightly, almost as if testing, measuring how much absence can exist before it is questioned. That confirms it. This is not collapse, not natural decline. It is design, a controlled reduction of visibility, a presence that moves without announcing itself, and ensures nothing else announces it either. He feels the weight of that realization settle, not urgency, something colder, more measured, a problem that cannot be confronted directly, only understood slowly. A commander asks for clarification on one of the marked regions. Threat level. Ackbar considers the question. There is no fleet, no confirmed hostile force, no engagement, in only silence. He answers carefully. Unknown. The commander waits, expecting more. There is none, because anything more would be assumption. An assumption is how threats like this remain unseen until they no longer need to hide. Ackbar returns his attention to the projection. The map does not show the silence clearly. It was never designed to. Maps display presence, movement, activity, not absence. He adjusts it, adds markers where nothing appears, where expected signals fail to exist. Gradually, a different shape emerges, not visible to those looking for fleets or battle lines, but visible to someone watching what has been removed. The shape is incomplete, but it is there, and it is growing, not in size, in intention. He does not announce it, not yet, because naming it too early would force it into a form that can be dismissed. It must be observed longer, understood more fully. Only then can it be spoken. Until that moment, he listens to the silence, because within it, something is already moving.